Good evening, and welcome to Pynchon Pals, a podcast about finally reading Thomas Pynchon. My name is Patrick Fiorilli, and I'm joined, as always, by Andrew Tillett.
How's it going?
And Duri Long.
Greetings.
On tonight's episode, we are discussing chapters 8 and 9 of Thomas Pynchon's V, a book we are all reading for the first time. What's the most Pynchon-esque thing that's happened to you in the last week? Starting off with a fun question.
Really hard.
It's a hard question.
We don't always have to jump straight into the literature.
Wait. I almost sent you guys this in the group message. Sabrina Carpenter was on SNL this past weekend. And you know how I don't know if you know this, they do like ads. They make ads specifically with like the musical guest and the host and stuff.
The little bumpers.
And,
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And they'll like, I guess play them on TV, but I always YouTube just like recommends them to me. And it was Marcelo and Sabrina doing it. And one of them had to do with their like worst fear being the dentist's beard, like rubbing against their chest. And I was like, oh, that's psychodontia.
There you go. Yeah. And never has there been a clearer illustration than that. It's pretty good.
Do you think we could get Sabrina on the pod to talk about psychodontia?
There's a short list, I think, of celebrities we wouldn't invite on the pod to talk about Thomas Pynchon, you know?
Why not Sabrina?
Sabrina, I didn't say Sabrina, and Sabrina's on that short list.
I didn't say he's saying we didn't let anyone on who wanted to talk about Thomas Pynchon.
I see. Sabrina, you are welcome.
Sabrina, you are welcome. Yes. We should be clear.
I'm struggling to remember anything that's happened to me in the past week, much less something that was Pynchon-esque. But I lost
That's pretty Pynchon-esque in and of itself.
You know, I lost my wallet. And I feel like that might be something that Benny Profane would do. Or perhaps something that Stencil would do and then develop a very elaborate story as to what happened to his wallet. So maybe that was the most Pynchon-esque thing that happened to me this week.
It wasn't some kind of caper of you attempting to retrace your steps around town?
I did attempt to retrace my steps. I did find the wallet. It was not in an exciting location. It would have been very disappointing to Herbert Stencil. Sidney Stencil?
Herbert Stencil's the son. Yeah.
I continue to get them mixed up.
It happens. Duri, you and I went to a pumpkin patch.
We did.
I don't know if that's especially Pynchon-esque, but
starts with a P.
Yeah, there's a giraffe there, and Pynchon likes sort of animals in odd places thus far. Alligators in the sewers, giraffes at the pumpkin patch. It's the worst part of the pumpkin patch, the fact that there's this poor giraffe there, sort of.
Giraffes don't belong in Illinois.
No,
wait, it's a real giraffe?
A real giraffe.
Oh, I don't know what I thought.
They have a whole.
I understand how that might not be immediately plausible.
They have a whole petting zoo, and the highlight, I guess, of the petting zoo is this giraffe who seems to enjoy eating all the carrots and stuff, but also I feel a little bit like from his perch, he is kind of judging me silently as I walk around the grounds.
What kind of crazy turtleneck does a giraffe wear in Chicago in the wintertime?
Sounds like a setup for a joke.
Does he has a very
It's not.
tall...
I'm asking, what does he do? Isn't he cold?
He has a very tall barn.
Yeah, sort of a giraffe-sized barn.
Mm-hmm.
There was also a porcupine there, and as we know, porpentine is an old word for porcupine.
We did say porpentine when we saw the porcupine.
Yeah. All right, more Pynchon-esque week than I would have thought. And so, Duri, you got your wallet back, and in Chapter 8, Rachel gets her yo-yo back. Rooney sings a song, and Stencil calls bloody chiclets. Would y'all like a little chapter summary of Chapter 8?
That would be great.
Yes, please.
All right, it is now April. Benny Profane, as usual, is distracted and aroused by every woman around him as he heads into the Space-Time Employment Agency. He's called to the interview desk of who else but Rachel Owlglass. The two have a strange and strained conversation before she sends him to Ole Bergamask of the Anthro Research Associates. Elsewhere, Winsome is fretting over Mafia's apparent affair with Pig Bodine, who shares her obsession with erotica. Rooney's titular song is a really racist, violent account of his journey from North Carolina to New York. Paula is avoiding Pig, and Rachel, acting the mothering type, feeds and puts Benny up at Winsome's. Meanwhile, Stencil spends his days confessing his conspiracy theories to Eigenvalue, who introduces him to Bloody Chiclets, president of the toy company turned weapons manufacturer Yoyodyne. Touring Yoyodyne's facilities, Stencil meets a former Nazi engineer named Kurt Mondagen.
Very succinct. That's exactly what happened.
It is exactly what happened, and it's also basically exactly what Pynchon writes in the little chapter summary of Chapter 8.
I was a little disappointed in this chapter, not because I didn't think it was good, but I think on the back of the 70-page Chapter 7, just deep in the stencilness of it all, I was excited for my aperitif of Profane and Rachel, and they're not in this chapter. They're in it for 3 pages, and then the chapter ends.
And they kind of hardly act like themselves. Well, Profane's kind of acting like himself. Yeah, we get very little Rachel interiority here.
We don't get a lot of anything.
Sounds like you didn't like this chapter.
No, it feels like chapters 7 and chapter 9 were both written, and the editor was like, you can't do 150 straight pages of this. And so then he went back and wrote 10 pages to break it up. So it was technically 3 separate things. And I just feel ripped off because I was excited for Benny Profane time.
Yeah, this wasn't my favorite chapter either. It was kind of depressing. I feel like I don't know. Maybe this isn't correct, but I have found some of the Whole Sick Crew interludes to be somewhat lighter and fair than the Stencil chapters. But then I was just thinking back to the whole situation with Fina, and maybe that's just not accurate at all. But this chapter I found to be a little bit bleak.
I think you're right, though, that the Whole Sick Crew, barring maybe Rooney and his sort of unrepentant racism, tend to be a little bit of the comic relief here. Whereas Benny is kind of a silly, goofusy sort of character, which belies a deep inner sadness. But he is often finding himself in extremely sad situations, or unable to extract himself from very sad situations. And so it does sometimes feel like it's a little Shakespearean, almost. Like we cut to some of our comic relief side characters who are commenting on the, I guess, as it were, A plot and B plot of Profane and Stencil, where they refer to things going on with Stencil and how weird he's acting. And we get sort of I don't know, now we're back in mirror territory, but we get a sort of reflection on the, I guess you could say, main action of the book that is happening in Benny's real world and Stencil's imagination. So what do we think of this reunion between the long-awaited, we've been waiting 215 pages, at least in my copy, for Benny to reunite with Rachel here, and they do so at the Space-Time Employment Agency.
I was not even clear that they recognized each other for a minute there.
Yeah, it was very unclear. They play it incredibly cool and professional, and then I reread that 2 pages a couple of times, and then just sort of moved on, and then Benny comes back later in the chapter, and you're like, oh, okay, great. Thank goodness. But I was about to be furious if getting her yo-yo back meant a quick run-in where, because Benny's, I don't know, had more of a beard than last time she saw him, they don't recognize each other and they just go their separate ways, which I guess is kind of what a yo-yo does. It only sits with the hand for a small percentage of the time, but that's not what I'm looking for. I want a little hand time.
So maybe we should set up how Benny gets into this situation, and then I do want to kind of unpack their, extremely odd rendezvous. And I think it's an open question of whether or not they seem to recognize each other here in this chapter. So Benny is, as he describes it, jobless and horny, leering at every woman in front of him, and he is reading through the classified section of the newspaper, whereupon, for one reason or another, his growing erection guides him to a particular classified call at the Space-Time Employment Agency.
Well, and the reason is because he's having this sort of like odd fantasy about, like, he starts thinking about why people use inanimate money to buy inanimate objects, and that he sees the purpose of inanimate money as being to get animate warmth, and then kind of goes into a sexual reverie, which leads to the erection. But I thought that was an interesting little passage where he was kind of pondering the purpose of money and like why he even wanted a job in the first place, and that he thought it was really stupid that people worked for inanimate money so they could buy inanimate objects. I think connecting to, he seems to have sort of a running theme of being frustrated with junk and waste and unnecessary materialism.
It starts out almost a little wholesome, where it sort of feels like a money can't buy happiness thing.
Yeah.
And then it gets a little darker, where he's like, well, for Benny, money can buy happiness, just not in a material way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, money can buy sexual satisfaction for Benny Profane, if not happiness. Or maybe that is the closest Benny Profane gets to happiness. I think this is not the first time in this book we've encountered this sort of parallelism between sex and sexuality and politics and kind of world history. In an earlier chapter, we have that musing that I believe it's the barmaid back in Cairo who muses about, like, didn't politicians use the same word for what they do with women for, what they do to a political rival? And so Benny is, in that sense, kind of in good political company, I guess, in having these thoughts, although he is taking them in a very different sort of self-satisfying direction. But
anyways, through one method or another, he gets led to this particular job listing.
Yeah. Speaking of directions, he is led in one.
So he then goes to the Space-Time Employment Agency, which, can we unpack that name a little bit?
I was trying for so long to think about what space-time could mean here, and I couldn't come up with anything that felt smart.
I don't really have anything either. I just think it's a wild name for an employment agency.
So what is space-time? Just basically on a physical level, what is space-time? Take it away, Andrew.
You're putting me on the spot here. I mean, in a way, space-time is everything, right?
I've been told by Carl Sagan and others that space-time is like a fabric onto which we drop some bowling balls.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great YouTube video for sure. I mean, it's what it literally is you're sort of combining the three dimensions of reality with like a fourth dimension of time and using that to do your upper level physics homework, which is how I used it. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot in these two chapters that remind me of things that I assume Gravity's Rainbow is about.
Gravity and
rainbows. Yeah, gravity, space-time. But yeah, I'm just unsure what's going on with this employment agency. I mean, on one hand, on the literalist of definitions, when you're at a job, you're being paid to stay at a place for a specific amount of time. So it could be just the most literal meaning of like what a job is.
Space and time.
Yeah, specifically in a kind of like in a Marxist sense of labor theory, which is that the thing that the laborer is selling is their time at a certain rate, and we call that rate a wage. And you are selling that limited finite time you have on Earth, as you just said, Andrew, to be in a space and to occupy it and perform a function.
We've also
a little more seriously, when you say like space-time, like Einstein, it's either like one word or it's a hyphenated word, but here it's space/time.
Yeah, good point.
And I was thinking, I was like, is there like a like space divided by time? Like what could be there? And I was like, velocity is not, I'm not putting it together. I was like, I feel like I'm stencil-esquely grasping at just straws here, trying to come up with how these things fit together, and I'm not getting it.
Can we talk about that, though? I feel like it really clicked for me in both of these chapters. I felt like Stencil. I was like looking stuff up, putting stuff together, trying to draw connections between characters. And maybe this is a little bit more in the next chapter than in this chapter, but I feel like one of my favorite parts of these two chapters is that I think Pynchon puts us in the role where we're almost required to be a little Stencil-esque.
Little stencil-pilled.
Yeah, like he doesn't tell us what things mean until like 12 pages after he introduces like a particular term or like mentions an event, and then it like comes to fruition 12 pages later. So you're like flipping back and forth. You're like trying to draw connections, and I felt like a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit accidentally off pod when we were first chatting about.
How dare you?
I'm really sorry. It happens sometimes. This is what, co-domesticity does. Even back as early as chapter 1, I think you see these references to things that if you have a particular kind of knowledge set, you know exactly what Pynchon is referring to. Where like specifically we had this conversation about the SPs, the Shore Patrol, where at the very end of the chapter, Pynchon comes out and says the Shore Patrol showed up. And then if you're not familiar with naval terminology, you might be like, oh, that's SP this whole time. But if you're a contemporary reader, or maybe even if you're a reader back in the day and you're reading this alongside, the set of encyclopedias at your library, you might be looking these things up in the meantime before Pynchon introduces them. But I do think there is an intentionality in the way Pynchon writes to force you to sit with the discomfort of not knowing exactly what's being referred to, oftentimes for a good 15 to 20 pages. And this comes up in a particular... This got me in a big way in the next chapter with this, the Strand Wolf, which comes up. I'm immediately Googling it. I'm learning that it's a type of brown hyena. And then it's only later in the chapter, in what feels like should be a kind of reveal that I have spoiled for myself by Googling it in advance. But you also can't always trust Dear Thomas to give you that context. You might be waiting for nothing.
What I will say, thank you right now to Thomas if he's listening.
Thomas, you're welcome. Thomas Pynchon, you're welcome to come on the podcast too. You are on the list of celebrities who is allowed to get invited.
In the next chapter, so much of it takes place all of it takes place in South and Southwest Africa. So there's a lot of Dutch in it, and there's several times that characters speak like a Dutch sentence, and I'm so glad you get the translation right afterwards. You read books sometimes, I mean, like Joyce is a good example where you're like, I don't know ancient Greek, I guess I'm just going to skip this section. But even in modern books, you'll be like just on sort of Google Translate on your phone every other page.
Yeah.
And thank you to Thomas for giving us the English.
The Russians are really bad about this because they use so much French in their text, and then it's only in some editions that you get normally the French is left untranslated, but is then helpfully sometimes put at the bottom in a footnote, and then unhelpfully sometimes put all the way at the back in an end note. And who has the time? What am I reading? Tolstoy or David Foster Wallace? Am I right?
That was a good one.
Thank you.
What were we talking about?
Space-Time Employment Agency.
We're talking about the Space-Time Employment Agency.
I don't have a clue what's going on here.
So they get there. Benny gets there, and he is ogling several women and making note of all of the other people who are sitting across from him in a scene that resembles in some ways the scenes in the waiting room of Schoenmaker's.
I was also reminded of that, yeah.
Benny draws out his application, And then Pynchon writes, as if magnetized, his head swiveled around, and he saw coming in the door a tiny girl lifted up to all of 5'1" by her heels. Oh boy, he thought. Good stuff. She was not, however, an applicant. She belonged on the other side of the rail. And he sort of follows this girl back behind the desk with his eyes. There's a receptionist who he's also kind of leering at, who he describes as, quote, a true wind-up woman. Again, this kind of like comparison of women to machinery or women to inanimate metallic objects like we saw with the teenagers back in Little Italy. And then the woman he was first looking at calls him over. Profane, she called, looking at him with a little frown. Oh God, he thought, the loaded chamber. And in a kind of funny way, he realizes there are 6 desks, which are the same odds you might have in Russian roulette. As a schlemiel, he figures he would always, draw the bullet in Russian roulette. And indeed, this time he does, and sits in front of a sign that says Rachel Owlglass.
So do you think he recognized her, or was he just like attracted to this woman and then it turned out to be Rachel?
When you're like, you see someone like their silhouette or like from behind, like I think it's kind of one of those. In my mind, that's what happened. He's like, damn, that lady is smoking. And then he turns around and he's like, it's Rachel.
But he doesn't go, it's Rachel, which I think is
say it out loud.
Yeah, he doesn't say it out loud, but she's the one who speaks first in a moment that feels a little bit kind of film noirish. She lit a cigarette and cased the upper half of his body. It's about time, she said. And I think this feels to me a little bit like the punchline to the setup of the Space-Time Employment Agency. Their relationship is about time in some way.
And space, like the yo-yo.
The yo-yo is about time and space.
Away from the hand.
And then they just kind of don't talk about it. And she gives him the name of someone to look out to reach out to for a job.
Yeah, they just have like sort of a clerical conversation.
They have a clerical conversation that Benny thinks about. Already they were in bed. He could see nothing but a new extemporized daydream in which no other face but this sad one with its brimming slash of eyes tightened him slowly in his own shadow, pale under him. God, she had him. Which also feels, this is an extemporized daydream. This is like out of time. And I think you're right, Andrew. I'm not sure how all of this threads together neatly, but it feels not coincidental that there is so much time being spoken about in this interaction. It is also true that I found some folks online. This is not something that comes up in either the like Pynchon wiki summary of this chapter or in J. Cary Grant of A Companion to V's summary of this chapter. But it does come up in some conversations on like an old Pynchon mailing list and on the like Thomas Pynchon Reddit, that it really does seem like they don't recognize each other. So I think it is maybe open for debate whether or not they recognize each other here at all. I kind of subscribe to the idea that they do recognize each other and they're just having an extremely fraught, clipped conversation.
I feel like they do recognize each other eventually. Like, it didn't seem like Profane necessarily recognized her initially, like you were saying, Andrew. But once he sits down at the desk and sees her name. So of course he knows it's her. But I think she recognizes him.
She should see his name too, right? Like it would be on
she
the
calls
application.
Profane. Or I guess the receptionist calls Profane.
Well, it's also
she did.
weird.
Yeah, she calls Profane.
It would be a weird thing to say, it's about time. If you just are in a setting like this where you're just sort of running through applicants all day and you've got like a 1 p.m., a 1:30, a 2, a 2:30 for, all he did was walk across the waiting room into her office, and then for her to say it's about time would be very snarky if you're just like an unknown person who's shown up to this agency.
Yeah, so I think they definitely recognize each other eventually. It's just a very weird, as you said, clipped interaction.
So Benny goes off. Rachel says, I just have to mention this because I mentioned all of the other uses, or I think all of the other uses, that Bergamask, the contact that she's giving Benny, will tell you right away he doesn't waste time. And then he can't figure out if Rachel was blowing a kiss or yawning as he leaves, which I thought was just kind of funny.
Ole Bergamask is another great name.
Ole Bergamask. I didn't look up whether this one was a kind of talking name or not.
I didn't either.
Of Anthro Research Associates.
Yeah, so he's going to be a night watchman for the Anthro Research Associates, which I feel like might gain some further meaning as we continue to discuss
A company
colonialism.
name like that has to mean something, and has to come back up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we've got Psychodontia. We have this we'll get into Yo-Yo Dine in a minute, and now Anthro Research.
And let's not forget Outlandish Records, whose head honcho we return to, Rooney Winsome.
Back
Oh,
with
Rooney.
Rooney Winsome, Pig Bodine, and Mafia.
Yeah,
The worst part of the whole sick crew.
Truly.
Pig Bodine's not so bad.
Yes,
He just likes drinking beer and talking about Jean-Paul Sartre. And who can blame him?
And making porno stories on his his naval ship.
Okay,
That's pretty
yes.
I'll give
We
it
should
to
talk
that.
about this.
That's a
This
fun
is
thing to
actually
do.
an extremely funny, cool thing that Pig Bodine does. Andrew, do you want to talk to us about this little prank?
Yeah, so before Pig went AWOL, he was on a ship called the USS Scaffold in the Mediterranean.
Which I think is also Benny's ship. I think this is why they know each other. I feel like the Scaffold came up earlier.
Yeah, I mean, he meets Happy at the end of this section, or in the end of this flashback story inside the section.
Yeah.
So he's part of this group, Task Force 60, which is a real group of the Navy, or at least it was in this time period. And sort of his side hustle is to be the porn guy. So he has a basically a little free library set up where you can come get some adult materials. And then one day, Pig sort of has grander schemes. He wants to become more of a porn producer. I guess, I don't know what the state of video pornography is in the 1950s, but he wants to produce some type of porn. And so one night what he does is he sets his whole task force on full alarm that the enemy is here, 5 bells. And then over the teletype system, which is a sort of automated keyboard that can, I guess, decode messages, he sends a pornographic story called The Green Door, and it sets off a fervor amongst all of the ships where every night for the remainder of the week, they send up a sort of a 5-bell alarm call to all the ships in the group to send porn to each other.
Yeah, so we get this little reverie into the escapades of Pig Bodine. And they're I don't know, kind of just hanging out in the apartment.
Which seems to be what they do most of the time, is hang out in an apartment.
Yes, that is kind of all that they're ever doing. And Winsome is sort of absentmindedly worrying that Mafia is having an affair with Pig Bodine without a lot of evidence necessarily, except that Pig Bodine keeps leering at Mafia. And then
Winsome is convinced that Mafia is imminently going to cheat on him, is what he talked about in the last Winsome section.
Yeah, and I think Pig and Mafia, as I mentioned in my summary, kind of share a penchant for erotic fantasy. Mafia has these extremely long-winded, as we talked about last time, kind of Ayn Randian social novels that are all about upstanding white Anglo-Saxon heroes finding true sexual satisfaction with their white Anglo-Saxon heroines. Meanwhile, Pig, as you just said, Andrew, has this sort of teletyped out over the ship's systems, this fantasy about the Green Door with seems to be a kind of orgy story starring Dolores, Veronica, Justine, Sharon, Cindy Lou, Geraldine, and Irving, which feels related perhaps to our rat priest's use of Veronica and all of the other sort of stand-in females. There's also, I guess, an Irving in Schoenmaker's office as well.
Is Irving a traditional woman's name?
No, I think Irving is the man. I think Irving is the man who is taking part in this fantastical orgy.
Irving was a woman in Schoenmaker's.
I guess that's true.
Pretty sure, because there was the one guy threw the scalpels at the wall, but that's not Irving.
Yeah,
Irving was like the receptionist.
Oh, the one with the freckles?
Yes, the surgically added freckles.
Let's go to babynames.com. Wikipedia says Irving is originally a Scottish surname and a variant of the name Irvine, which is derived from the eponymous River Irvine in
Scotland.
Dumfriesshire. It is also a male given name. So I think the Irving in the earlier chapter is supposed to be kind of incongruous. Or, these two chapters have a lot going on, I think, with sort of cross-dressing. So maybe there is a kind of transgender interpretation. Not sure that stood out to me at the time, but thinking on it now, perhaps there's a reading to be made there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Pig's prank is fun. And I think Pig sounds like more or less a fun hang. I don't think he's done anything that feels extremely objectionable as of yet, unless I'm forgetting something, in which case I apologize.
Unlike Rooney Winsome,
Rooney,
apparently, according to a song he made up, participated in a lynching.
At the age of 3.
Yeah, and that's part of his sort of self-made autobiography that he sings to himself randomly.
I would like to take this as an opportunity to apologize to the people of Wilmington. Because the first line of this song is born in Durham in 23. So we've answered our question of where is Rooney Winsome from in North Carolina.
Did I can't remember if I suggested that he might be from Durham.
You said like Eastern North Carolina, like peanut country region.
Okay, yeah.
But you didn't, I don't think you name dropped Durham.
Yeah, I was debating whether he seemed like a what was Duke before it was Duke, like Trinity College, type figure, but turns out indeed.
Patrick, how good is your podcast editing? You could drop back in your waffling on what city he was from here.
That's true. Right here. I do think this feels like sort of tobacco family type thing, but I will admit I am not so familiar outside of tobacco and peanuts and cotton, sort of what the economic stratification was in North Carolina in, I guess, how Winsome seems a little older than some of the other whole sick crew. So he's
got to be 20s or 30s.
20s. Yeah. So Rooney sings this song, his autobiography, to the tune of the like Davy Crockett song. Y'all know this?
No.
This seems like a reference that would have hit a lot harder in the 1960s.
I don't know. I don't know like where this song comes from. I want to say it's in like, isn't it like a Disney thing? Yeah, okay, here we go.
Are you going to sing it for us?
Not
Rooney's song.
If it's Disney, do not play it.
Yeah, that's true. No, not Rooney's song. I don't think the Ballad of Davy Crockett is on Disney Plus. No, so
I was meant from getting sued to oblivion, but yeah.
Oh yeah, there we go.
Boycott too.
Either one. So Rooney starts thinking about this because it is the quote unquote height of the like Davy Crockett coonskin cap craze.
This felt like a callback to the alligator craze, the Macy's alligator craze that led to all the alligators in the sewer. Now he was saying millions of kids everywhere you looked were running around with these bushy symbols on their heads.
Yeah, I don't know if this is, in point of fact, an actual craze that happened in 1956. I guess it seems like the Disney Davy Crockett business, the song was released in like 1955 for a 1954 to 1958 Disney show that included segments about Davy Crockett. And in point of fact, Wikipedia has a whole section on the Crockett craze. So Pynchon is just pulling from reality with this one, I suppose.
I mean, people still wear these hats. Like, I mean, not people like, you don't see adults wearing them very often unless they're like the drummer in a band. But like kids, you still like, that's like a thing you can buy, I feel like. Like,
yeah,
if you
like
were
Halloween
at like
costumes for sure.
Yeah, or if you were at like I mean, almost like your kind of the petting zoo you guys described earlier. I wouldn't be surprised if the gift shop had one of those hats on the wall.
Yeah, indeed. But the song, it's it's like Davy Crockett, king of the wild frontier. And then it, goes from there. That's probably as much as I can sing without Disney getting word of us.
Yeah.
But you can sing this to that tune. And it tells, as you mentioned, Duri, of Winsome being a participating attendant of this terrible lynching of a black man back in let's see, if he was 3, that would have been 1926. He starts going out with a woman and gets her pregnant, and then sort of ships out for the war. But yeah, he gets shipped out for the war, but doesn't actually see any fighting, and is mostly behind a desk for most of the war, and then starts a career as like a copywriter, and eventually starts up this record company, Outlandish Records. And he defines himself as king of the decky dance, like decadence, I suppose.
That's the conclusion I came to on trying to Google what a decky dance looked like.
I mean, it is decadence, but it also feels like, I don't know, if you told me that in some part of North Carolina they had a thing called a decky dance that was a long-standing and probably racist tradition, I would believe it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of crazy dance moves out there. It seemed very reasonable that a decky could be a style of dancing.
So enough about Rooney. We briefly return to Paula, who is kind of a fascinating figure to me in this book, because
she's never here.
She's never here. She keeps being referred to, but I think the last time the narration actually described her being present was back at McClintock Sphere's show at the V-Note in like chapter 2.
Yeah, but kind of everybody wants to get together with her.
Or figure out where she is.
Yeah, she's constantly missing or off somewhere, and I feel like that's going to come home to roost later. I think we're going to find out where Paula has been, but everyone's constantly a little bit worried about where Paula is.
Bensel's just waiting around trying to figure out how Paula falls into the whole V situation, so Paula might be the one to crack this case wide open.
Yeah, I think she's the key.
Yeah, Winsome ends this section by sort of violently throwing Mafia down onto the bed. Quote, he lifted her like the victim she wasn't. So their marriage is in a bad place, I think, safe to say.
I feel like here and in a few other places, we have like sort of a running slippage, lack of clarity between kind of like BDSM and like sexual violence and rape.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
In some cases,
sure.
It's very clear what's what. And in other cases, the line feels a little blurrier.
I don't think is anyone have sex in these 2 chapters that is clear cut, cool, and good? I don't think so.
Yeah, it's a foreshadowing of things to come in a big way. I do feel like this chapter is in retrospect, an interesting sort of prelude to a lot of the stuff that happens in the next chapter, which we will, get to when we get to.
Yeah, I mean, not to skip ahead, but there's a passage in the next chapter, which maybe I won't read it out loud now. We'll get to it later, but it talks about the clock, a particular clock, and I'm trying to figure out how to summarize this without just reading it.
You could just go ahead and read it.
I'll just go ahead and read it.
Flash forward.
We can come back to it when we come back to it. But he says, we are perhaps the lead weights of a fantastic clock, necessary to keep it in motion, to keep an ordered sense of history and time prevailing against chaos. Very well, let a few of them melt. let the clock tell false time for a while, but the weights will be reforged and rehung, and if there doesn't happen to be one there in the shape or name of, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Willem van Wyk, to make it run it right again, so much the worse for me. And I kind of took that passage. It was spoken by these colonialist individuals, perpetrators of genocide. We'll get to it in a minute. But I took it to mean that, like, this sort of colonialism, like, never dies. Like, you might melt down the weights and reforge them, but they'll be reforged again. And this sort of power dynamic will, like, continue to come back over time. And I felt like that was kind of, this chapter as a prelude to the next chapter was kind of like, you know, we're in a different time, we're in a different space, a different time. And yet we still see these, like, vestiges of racism and sexual violence and class differences and etc. sort of in quote unquote modern day, at the time, New York City.
Modern day bohemian New York City too.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is supposed to be the quote unquote the lefties, the avant-garde, the people who should be above this sort of thing. So yeah, Profane returns back to space-time. He gets the job. And then we swing back to sort of the most we get, I guess, of Rachel by herself in this chapter, as Benny is thinking through his relationship with Rachel. And Pynchon writes, Rachel was Jewish, he recalled, like his mother. Maybe all she wanted to do was feed him, be a Jewish mother. And sure enough, she feeds him some food and finds him a place to stay, which is back at Winsome's.
I'm kind of over Benny, I gotta be honest. Like, he's so self-pitying. Like, if he would just, like, believe in himself, I think he would do just fine. He's got a job now. He seems hardworking. Like, he seems like he's likable enough. Like, he seems to make friends. Like, I just, like, truly do not understand why he is so down on himself. And it's, like, a little, like, pitiful at this point.
Yeah, it's quite pitiful.
And he I don't know, he just, like, backs himself into a corner. Like, if he just had a little self-confidence.
He said yes to, like, one good thing that happened to him.
Yes.
Once. We're 250 pages into this book, and he has said no every time. And if he said yes one time, the book would end. That'd be the end of the book.
Why he didn't just, like, find Rachel to begin with in New York City is beyond me. Like, she doesn't seem upset to see him. She hooks him up with a place to stay. Like, what was the whole venture with the alligators about?
Benny, I've got some motivational YouTube videos I would like to link to you. Is anything else extremely important?
McClintock Sphere has a song called Fugue Your Buddy. Hilarious.
Oh yeah, and Outlandish Records might be signing McClintock Sphere. That's some news.
2 whole LPs.
Benny feels, he says, the Rusty Spoon might be a nice place, but it's out of my class. So even though, he felt at home in the sailor's grave, but perhaps not in the Rusty Spoon.
He's got no money. I don't know how Pig is doing it, but I guess the issue is that Pig will talk about Sartre and can get drinks bought for him, but Profane is too much of a voyeur, and since he doesn't participate in the conversation, no one buys him a drink, and he can't go.
There's a very funny line here where it says 2 or 3 members got members, meaning members of the whole sick crew. 2 or 3 members got Profane off in a corner and began to indoctrinate him in the ways of the crew. He let them lecture and drank beer. Soon he was drunk and it was night. He remembered to set the alarm clock, found an unoccupied corner of a room, and went to sleep. Which is just the funniest. Like, he's so bored by, like, the whole sick crew. He's really not having what they're spinning for him.
What do you think lesson 1 of whole sick crew indoctrination is? Is it like, if we say Maya, it means make yourself at home, or whatever that acronym is?
Yeah. Yeah, and like, what are the ways of the crew? What's rule number 1?
Rule number 1 is talk about the whole sick crew constantly. Pig, Bodine, and Charisma sing a song about how much they love the Rusty Spoon. Pig seems to have fully moved on from the sailor's grave. Who needs that old joint when you have the exciting intellectual debauchery of the rusty spoon.
I'm sure some of the ways of the crew is just like gossiping about the other members of the whole sick crew.
Yeah.
Like they're definitely giving him the lowdown on everyone.
Dozens of members of the whole sick crew that he's got to learn the names of.
Yeah, Winsome, he's a racist, and Mafia, she's also racist,
but differently.
But she has an erotica novel on the side.
In fact, it's easier for us to name the members of the whole sick crew who aren't prejudiced in some way.
Yeah, maybe they're not really self-aware of that. Perhaps that's not part of the indoctrination.
So in the next section, we get a really interesting kind of zoom out, a kind of historical portrait of this moment in time on April 15th. What are we? 1956, I guess. We're still in 1956. The David Ben-Gurion warned his country in an Independence Day speech that Egypt planned to slaughter Israel. There's a Mideast crisis that had been growing since winter. Grace Kelly gets married to the Prince of Monaco on the same day, on April 19th. Pynchon writes, people read what news they wanted to, and each accordingly built his own rat house of history's rags and straws. Which, yeah.
Go ahead. Keep going. No, say your thing.
Well, so I was going to say two things. One, just as a historical note, one of the things that we do know about Pynchon's own naval career is that the ship he was on was deployed in October of 1956 to the Suez Crisis. So this, storm that's brewing in the Middle East between Israel and Egypt is the thing that Thomas Pynchon most notably participated in during his time in the Navy, which is, I guess, partly why he, maybe has floated around some of the ports in the Mediterranean. Secondly, this feels like a really kind of prescient encapsulation of how news works in a televisual, or, you know, we might now say kind of networked media ecosystem.
Yeah, I was thinking about filter bubbles when you read that. He talks about everyone's own sort of like private versions of history being built. In the city of New York alone, there were, at a rough estimate, 5 million different rat houses of history's rags and straws. So I agree. That felt prescient to me.
Andrew, what were you going to say?
I was going to say about this rat house, you know, they talk about sort of, I mean, he says taking history's rags and straws, you're sort of building this greater story around these sort of bits and pieces, which in a way is how this novel is, right? Like it centers on several very specific sort of geopolitical events, and the story's built around that. But then right afterward, to say stencil fell outside the pattern is absolutely ridiculous. It is the most ridiculous thing I've read in a long time, to think that this main character of this book is not just like, I mean, I don't know if Pynchon agrees with that, but Stencil agrees with it, that he's maybe not doing it. But with everything built on these sort of bits and pieces, sort of crafting together this nest, it's crazy.
Yeah, Stencil, so funny. I have been thinking more and more about his name and why he's named Stencil.
I feel like I mentioned that several episodes ago, and y'all gave me some crap about it.
Didn't pick that up.
Well, no, I connected it to the fossils. I connected it to the fossils that Mildred had, and I don't actually know that a stencil is very much like a fossil, but please go ahead.
I was thinking of
remember, I do remember saying that.
I remember the fossil
but
connection.
Duri, please give us a much more literary...
A much more a better thought out.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking like a stencil is, you know, it's an outline. And I was thinking that he keeps trying to like, either, I had two interpretations. One was that he keeps trying to sort of like trace these sort of outlines of reality. Like he's trying to sort of like trace truths into existence. But then I was also thinking, actually, maybe what he's doing is filling in the blanks. Like he's being given stencils, like these sort of traces of things from his dad's notes, from things he encounters. And then what he's doing is filling in the stencil. Like he's sort of like shading in the outline with all of the sort of rich detail that Herbert Stencil is able to come up with in his imagination.
Is this something? Profane, everything we get with Profane is interior monologue. He doesn't really do any actions, right? Like, he occasionally has a job, but it's mostly him just sort of thinking about things and thinking about how much he sucks and his life sucks. But with Stencil, we don't get any interior Stencil monologue, basically. It's entirely, like, every time he's on screen, he's telling us a story that did not happen to him. So in that way, they're sort of opposites. And then with a Stencil, it's all outline, right? There's no interiority.
Interior. Oh, that's interesting.
I dig that. That's better than it being a fossil. I'll give both of y'all that one. I concede. Yeah, the thing that I started thinking about here, and I do think it comes into focus for me in the next chapter, is that there's a way in which, in this quest for V, and Stencil identifies himself, we do kind of get a little bit, this is either Stencil thinking about himself, but more likely it feels like this is kind of Eigenvalue's summation of Stencil's problem. And in fact, it says that the whole sick crew kind of refers to this as like his problem with V and his obsession with V, and his identity as someone who looks for V. What is it? Pynchon writes, if she was a historical fact, then she continued active today and at the moment, because the ultimate plot which has no name was as yet unrealized, though V might be no more a she than a sailing vessel or a nation. And he's also thinking about like sexuality and his own sort of like polymorphic identities here in some intriguing ways that, as I mentioned, these two chapters have a lot to do with cross-dressing in ways I don't exactly pull together. Anyways, point I was trying to make is that there's a way of thinking about the thing that Stencil is after is an answer to the question of why is all of this the way that it is? Like, you look at the world and you look at what has gone on and what is going on in it, and you are trying to think, what is the cause for this? There's like a metaphysical sense of, what is the cause of all this suffering, but there is also, he looks at the marriage of Grace Kelly and the like tensions between Israel and Egypt, and he's just asking himself constantly why, and he is offloading that question onto a singular kind of subject that he is searching the archives of the world, both personal and political, in order to track down what that ultimate cause or thing is.
I like that interpretation because I feel like it. First of all, like, I feel like we're kind of we're put in the position of Stencil, not just because we're, sort of reading his different stories, but like I've, as the reader, have been trying to piece together who V is. And I realized in this section that Stencil is just as confused as I am. He was like, is it Vesu? Is it Victoria the rat? Veronica the rat? Is it Victoria Wren? Is it, he lists all the different V's that have come up. And I was like, oh, so he is just as mixed up as we are. And I think especially as we go into the next chapter, which is about, sort of horrific atrocities committed by people. And Stencil is kind of impersonating these different characters and trying to, I guess, like, think through their thought patterns of like why they committed these horrible atrocities. Like, he's trying to find sense where there is not sense to be found.
Yeah, it must have something to do with V. Why?
Yeah, like why else would someone do this horrible thing if not, being related to this like broader conspiracy that he's dreamed up to explain everything.
As he says, he's trying to find how his quarry fitted in with the big one, the century's master cabal, that there's like an ultimate order, and that will explain why all of this, in a big sense, I'm waving my hand, listener, all of this has happened.
Which is also, a very real reason that people fall into sort of like conspiratorial mindsets.
It's also a real reason why people go to grad school.
To solve and make sense of a world that doesn't make a lot of sense a lot of the time.
Yeah. So his latest, the latest trail that he follows is this bloody chicklets of Yo-Yo-Dine, who, another fad, realized that children were really into these yo-yo things and started making them until some engineers told him that, like, hey, those gyroscopes.
No,
Kinda
not
like these...
engineers. Children.
Wait, someone who tells him
I thought it said school kids on a tour pointed out that the
yeah, it's school kids on a
worked
tour.
on the
right.
same principle as a gyro compass.
Yeah, because they're learning about sailing and military technology, I guess. And
children love weapons, guys.
Children do love weapons, though. That's the thing.
This
It's a
toys
good
to
business
military
model.
pipeline. Yeah.
Sell both to both.
Yeah, so he reconfigures the company using gyroscopes as his basis, and combines the name Yo-Yo with Dine, which one newly hired engineer, that's what I was thinking of, told him was a unit of force.
And Andrew's nodding.
Yeah, I looked this up. It's like centimeter squared. It's like 1/10,000th of a Newton, basically. Like it's the same standard units, but using like centimeters and millijoules or something instead of joules and square meters.
So like a little unit of force.
Yeah, it's a very, if you're working in Dines, you're not like picking up things. You're like very, very quietly nudging something. Like
Pulling a yo-yo back.
That still might be Newtons.
That might
Dines
be
are very small.
I don't know what a centimeter is. Yeah, and then at Yo-Yo Dine, he meets this Kurt Mondagen, which I do know is a talking name that means moon eyes.
Which
yes, Duri?
did just like, once again, I was like, you think you're going into... So I kind of like missed the framing device here, if I'm being honest. Like, I just like kind of... I don't know, maybe I read this very early in the morning. I was kind of skimming over the end of the chapter. I moved on to chapter 9, and it wasn't until like halfway through chapter 9 that I realized that like chapter 9 had been set up at the end of chapter 8. So I came back and I reread this. And I was like, once again, we have Stencil going down this like conspiratorial rabbit hole. We are spending a very long time learning about Kurt Mondagen. And he is just a random guy that Stencil met when he went to see his buddy Bloody Chicklets' factory on a whim.
On a whim, because Eigenvalue introduces him to Bloody Chicklets.
Yeah, like it has no connection to anything. Like he just met this dude in the filing section of this factory and was like, oh, now this is connected.
I think we might be unhappy to find out if you tour a random weapons factory post World War II, the chances that it's not just a guy is pretty high.
Yeah. Yeah. And Kurt Mondagen is not just a guy. He is a former Nazi engineer, which is not, I mean, that's not stated in so many words in the text, but I'm not going to pronounce the German words correctly, but the place.
Geltungswaffe?
Yeah.
Einsatzwaffe?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, better known to us English speakers as the V1 and V2 rockets.
Which, for those people that don't know much about weapons like me, are long-range German artillery weapons that were developed at Peenemünde. Thank you, Andrew. Which was the site of the Nazis' rocket and missile development during World War II. So Kurt, definitely a Nazi engineer that has somehow found his way to the United States military establishment. Somehow.
Who can say?
How you've gotten over here, guys.
Someone should write a book about this. But these rockets are the thing that tip Stencil off, recognizing that they're the V1 and V2 rockets, which is Pynchon writes, the magic initial. So this is the connection that Stencil is drawing. And so he like leaves and then makes an appointment to like, hey, can we like get, can we grab a beer sometime and you tell me what it is you have to tell me? And Kurt basically says like, oh, sure. And then we move into the next chapter. We get, at the end of this chapter, it says that we should interpret the next chapter as all happening in Stencil's retelling of Kurt's story to Eigenvalue, which had become, as Eigenvalue put it, stencilized.
I thought that was very funny.
It is good.
Yeah, I liked it. I think it's going to be interesting to compare sort of the structure of this chapter to the first two Stencil chapters we get, which are based off of like the notes of his father and are very fragmentary and have like lots of characters that you don't really sit with, and then this chapter being just like a long haul linear story. Well, mostly linear. Yeah. Effectively linear.
Effectively linear. Anything we have to say remaining about chapter 8? Final thoughts? Should we move to chapter 9?
I guess we have to at some point.
Yeah.
I guess the time is nigh. So, I have a brief summary here that I would like to present to the class.
Please do, Professor.
Chapter 9, Mondagin's Story. Better called Mondagin's Story, Stencil's version. In May of 1922, Kurt Mondagin, then an engineering student from Munich, is researching electromagnetic anomalies called spherics in what is now Namibia, but which was then the League of Nations Mandate of Southwest Africa, formerly German Southwest Africa. Fearing an imminent rebellion by the Bondelswarts tribe of the Nama people, Mondagin flees to the extensive plantation estate of one Foppel, wherein he finds an endless bacchanal in progress. The doors are barred behind him. There, playing the perpetual voyeur, he meets a mysterious woman with one mechanical eye named Vera Meroving, her companion, Lieutenant Weissman, a now elderly Hugh Godolphin, a 16-year-old sexual sadist named Hedwig Vogelsang, and Foppel himself, who fetishizes the Herero and Nama genocide of 1904 and worships its ostensible orchestrator, General Lothar von Trotha. Mondagin spends 2.5 months wandering the Gothic halls and torture chambers of the estate, decoding atmospheric noise, contracting scurvy, and feverishly envisioning himself as a perpetrator of countless atrocities seemingly drawn from Foppel's endless stories. The uprising is brutally quelled as Mondagin flees from the estate. So, it is worth pointing out here, just sort of like at the top, first of all, that we are 3 white Americans talking about this story, which is important because this being based on a bunch of historical atrocities, the chapter refers to a number of real-world ethnic groups, most notably, as I just mentioned, the Herero and the Nama. Throughout the chapter, the text refers to the Nama people by various terms and sort of tribes within the Nama people who are part of the Kwe-speaking Khoi ethnic group. And the chapter refers to them variously Bondels, Bondelswarts, and most often by the outdated and today offensive term Hottentot, which was presumably invented by Dutch and or German colonizers in a racist imitation of their language. In context, this choice feels deliberate and characteristic, especially taken with some of the other racist language in this chapter of the imperialist mindset of Pynchon's characters, even when it is employed in narration. And for this reason, and given the term's sort of like prevalence in the chapter, you know, we will probably use it to avoid confusion in quotation, but also we are recognizing that, you know, the term Nama tends to be the preferred term these days. And we also want to recognize that it is doing something textual and thematically, potentially in Pynchon's use of it. And, you know, so we're not glossing over things and making our own conversation and you, the listener's interpretation of it, or you, the reader's interpretation of it, more confused than it needs to be. So we're mostly following the book, but, you know, if we misstep anywhere along this path, do let us know, and we will try to do better in the future. But wanted to get ahead of that out front. Anything y'all want to add to that?
No, I think that was good.
Okay,
Got it.
Great.
Yeah, this was a heavy chapter.
It was a very heavy chapter.
I don't think I've read anything quite this graphic and violent since in 7th grade. I read a book.
And that's a hell of a way to start this sentence.
A Long Way Gone by Ismail Bea, which was about the Sierra Leone Civil War. I was a young adolescent who was very interested in history. And I think I like picked it up out of like my grandma's nonfiction book collection. And it was extraordinarily violent and graphic, and I made like a visual book report on it, and my 7th grade teacher pulled my parents aside. I mean, my visual book report was not quite as violent as the book, but anyway, there was like a
visualized.
There was a knife and some blood, and my 7th grade teacher did pull aside my parents and ask them if I was all right. To which my parents were like, I think so. She's just like interested in history. Anyways, I haven't read anything quite so graphic since then as this until this chapter. I'll be honest, when I signed up for this podcast, I was not necessarily prepared for this, but here we go.
Are you saying that I didn't do a good job at communicating the full breadth of Pynchon's interest in global atrocities?
I can't say I was fully aware of that, but we're in it now. And I will say this was one of, in my opinion, one of the best like written chapters of the book so far. It was, the prose was, we can talk more about it, but I thought it was a really interesting chapter in terms of the writing, even if it was hard to get through content-wise.
It feels like it's doing something important in the book. It feels justified in a real way. Andrew, what about you?
Yeah, I agree. This chapter is definitely incredibly heavy. I think it's very Pynchon the way, especially towards the end of the chapter, the narrative focus begins to pivot back and forth rather quickly, and then not always in like a steady way between scurvy-ridden Mondaugen and presumably Foppel's perspective of events from the earlier, from like 1904 through 8. So from a literary structure standpoint, I enjoyed that a lot. But yeah, having to read it wasn't the most pleasant thing I've done this week or in a long time.
Yeah, I think speaking of the kind of literary experimentation here, there's a couple things to point out up front. One of which is I do think this kind of polyvocality, or the way that perspective shifts back and forth, as you just said, between our obviously all of this is being relayed through stencil, but bracketing that Kurt Mondaugen as our perspective character, and then his feverish dreams of this other character who is presumably Foppel, but it seems that some critics, based on what I was reading, interpret this as two different characters.
I thought it was Godolphin at times. Was I mistaken there?
He says at the beginning of that section, he says when he's got scurvy that he is having trouble telling Foppel and Godolphin apart, with the context, I guess, being that we're getting perspective from like a German, presumably a young man who's in a German infantry unit in 1900 when Godolphin was a elderly British naval officer.
Yeah.
At that time. So probably not Godolphin, in my opinion, based on what we know about him, but it's definitely an interpretation that I've seen online.
And some critics have sort of separated them even further as like, this is what is the horse's name? Firelily, I think.
Yeah.
And refer to this dream character as the rider of Firelily, as, you know, a totally separate entity who is an amalgamation of all of these fantasies and imaginings. So there's one way in which that resembles something like a William Faulkner sort of switching characters and perspectives in the same page, in the same paragraph, even in the same sentence. I learned recently that I think it's As I Lay Dying, the original instructions that Faulkner wanted were to render each different perspective in a different colored ink in the book, which I did not know about before, but his printers at the time were basically like,
that's so expensive.
That's crazy expensive. We're definitely not doing that, William. But now there is an edition you can get that has all of the ink's different colors.
If we ever do a spinoff, I
Faulkner
love
Friends.
As I Lay Dying. Shout out to my high school English class. Would love to reread that with y'all post
Isn't part of
Pynchon.
the fun of Faulkner's branch of stream of conscious being like, who's talking right now? Like, I have to pay attention and find out. And if you could just flip to the front and be like, it's red, I can't think of a single character.
Addie?
The little boy, yes, Addie. You'd be like, this is significantly easier.
I mean, maybe that's what the man wanted. Anyways, I do think there are echoes of that in this story for sure. And then, speaking of American literature, this is not something that is original to me necessarily, but it's something I was thinking about as I was reading through this. There's a lot of Edgar Allan Poe in here, and specifically The Mask of the Red Death, which is about these extremely wealthy aristocrats barricading themselves inside this castle where a raucous party is going on as death slowly comes for them and they all succumb to the plague outside.
It felt very gothic, like the turret and the dreaminess being like lost in these hallways, and the like decadence of the food and the dress and the
decky
drinking.
Dance.
The decky dance.
I think this is the decky dance. We are watching the decky dance unfold before us. So I do think, I don't know, there's a particular way in which, even though we're in Namibia, Southwest Africa, through a particularly German colonialist lens, I don't know, this whole chapter felt very kind of American Gothic to me in a real way. And maybe that is also the connections that Pynchon seems to intentionally be drawing between, racial violence in colonial Africa and racial violence elsewhere around the globe.
Yeah, I do feel like we have a lot of mirrors and clocks that are again,
there's
calling back to the idea that this is all reflected in different times, and the clock is, winding and unwinding. And
there's even a big clock in Mask of the Red Death.
Really?
Big clock that keeps ticking incessantly toward
well, that's
its
very
fatal
like
end.
a Poe, the heart situation.
Uh-huh. All right, so I think this chapter does not lend itself super well to our usual brand of beat-by-beat reporting, but I do think we can
We'd be here for 7 hours.
Be here for a long time, and we'd be talking about, we'd be re-explaining a lot of extreme violence and sort of grotesqueries that are probably better read than, listened to as you are driving to work or washing the dishes or whatever.
I concur.
So, not that we're going to ignore them, but I think it will be more productive to talk about some of these things in broader strokes and at a higher thematic level. And we'll dive in where necessary. But we are introduced to this character, Kurt Mondagen, as this radio antenna engineer who is fleeing from his one little outpost at the advice of another fellow there towards this estate in order to escape what could be a particularly violent rebellion or uprising in the area.
Can we talk about what he's doing as a radio engineer? He's like looking for atmospheric radio disturbances called spherics.
Yeah, Duri, what don't you get about that? This seems very straightforward to me.
We all know about spherics.
Patrick and I were both reading this chapter the other night, and we were both sitting there like making noises because
making slide whistle noises to
Yes,
yourselves. Yeah, I also did that.
That's okay. Great. Glad we're all on the same page there. Yeah, they are like little noises, maybe sometimes sounding like a slide whistle descending in pitch, or warbling of birds, clicks, hooks. They like describe a whole variety of different sounds that could be made. It kind of reminded me of Outlandish Records a little bit with the like recording of sounds. But anyways, they're caused by atmospheric disturbances. I was a little confused by spherics. That's why I wanted to bring it up.
Yes.
They are a real thing, we should say.
Right.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Oh, I was going to say, so this guy, so he gets sent to Southern Africa as part of a research team led by this guy Barkhausen, who was a real physicist in the 1920s. He did discover an audio physical phenomenon, but it was not spherics. He discovered basically that if you have a ferromagnetic, like a piece of ferromagnetic material, like a piece of iron or something, and you disturb the magnetic field that is flowing through it, the individual atoms in the ferromagnetic material will not sort of uniformly change under the influence of an external magnetic field. They will sort of individual atoms will swing one at a time. And so you can get, if you're like, put it in a coil or something, you can listen to the individual like atoms slowly changing direction. You get like a popping sound, which was very confusing to me. I had to read the entire Wikipedia page before I could even like just like I was
to
like,
read the entire Wikipedia page to realize that it wasn't actually what was being discussed in the chapter.
Wasn't what we were. Yeah, I was like, what does this have to do? And it is a real thing that is not the spherics that he is looking for.
But
Patrick, do you want to
spherics,
describe real spherics?
real spherics. I'm going to do my best shot. Basically, the Earth has an electromagnetic field. So there's a lot of matter rubbing together in the atmosphere, and there's an electromagnetic field. And then when lightning happens, as a result of electrical discharges in that atmosphere, there are these electromagnetic impulses that shoot through the rest of the atmosphere, and those can be registered from quite a ways away. And so a large part of our weather measuring apparatus is based on some of these this spheric data that we are listening to through effectively like radio waves as opposed to visual spectra. And so a lot of that research, I guess, was getting off the ground in the early part of the 20th century here. And so that is the kind of research that Mondagen is doing down here, specifically in the southern hemisphere, I guess, to track the goings on on different parts of the globe. There's a really interesting thing that happens here that I just want to shout out that kind of blew my mind, where Mondagen talks about South sickness, and we're getting once again this sort of valorization of the North and the global North and the putting down of the global South. But he refers to it as mirror time. And in point of fact, the seasons are mirrored between the two hemispheres, which I was like, wow, there's a real mirror time on Earth, which seems obvious in retrospect, but Thomas Pynchon got me with that one. Yes, that is my explanation of spherics.
I just want to jump in here real fast. The Earth's magnetic field is due to its iron core, not the atmosphere.
Okay.
I just wanted to correct you on that. It sounded like that's, I don't know if that's what you were going for, but I don't want our podcast putting out that the atmosphere causes the magnetic field.
That makes sense.
For the physicists out there.
I'm going to be honest.
Yeah, just in case.
I didn't totally know what causes the electromagnetic field around Earth, but it makes sense that it would be iron. But there is a lot of stuff rubbing together in the atmosphere, which causes lightning.
The lightning. Yeah.
Causes the lightning.
There we go.
The rubbing together does cause the lightning.
Whew, that's what I meant. 100%. Yeah, you just didn't let me finish, Andrew.
I'm sorry, Patrick. I was confused. I thought I just misunderstood what you said. I just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page.
Yeah, we're all on the same page. So we're all on the same page about spherics.
Yeah.
When I Googled this, I found one of the first things that comes up is a NASA white paper on it's like a PDF that I tried reading through, and then I got to the part with all of the equations, and I was like, I don't think I need to do this for my podcast. But if you Google spherics, it's there.
Yeah, so he's recording spherics in what is now Namibia, and at the time was a former German colony, but still.
Should we run through the geopolitics of this?
Yeah, I think that would be helpful to frame things for the audience.
Right. So the geopolitics begin with the iron core of Earth.
They do. But I guess if we cast ourselves back to whenever we learned world history, by the mid 1800s, the European, the major, colonizers of Europe are cutting Africa up into their respective realms of influence, I guess. And Germany, through some inter-European treaties, decided that they were going to colonize this section of what is now Namibia and I guess partially maybe South Africa. And it was German West or Southwest Africa. Then during World War I, the Union of South Africa, which was under the British Empire, pushed the, I guess, relatively small contingent of the German army out of that area and took it over. And then after World War I ended, the Union of South Africa. Sorry, wait, no, I'm messing this name up.
What'd you say, Patrick? The League?
What?
It's the League of Nations put Southwest Africa under the mandate of the Union. It's referred to in the text several times.
Yeah, it is the Union of South Africa. That's
okay,
correct.
Cool. Okay, great.
The predecessor of what is today the Republic of South Africa.
Right. So they had a League of Nations mandate to govern what is now former German Southwest Africa to be one day Namibia. So that is sort of when we hear Mondaugen talk about sort of his angst at living in a place that is not German anymore due to the loss of the war. That's what he's referencing. And then sort of while the Germans were there, there was a major rebellion by the Nama people, which is the sort of 1903 to 1908 genocide that we hear about. And then again in 1922, there was a second, I guess, significantly smaller scale rebellion, which is what I guess what we consider the present for this book. And those rebellions seem to, from not having read terribly extensively on it, seem to be through basically the same sort of things that you would expect a colonial power to do. They were siphoning land and resources, imposing harsher laws. The Germans in particular had a lot of incredibly racist policy that they would put out about like what constituted, or like I think it said that the Germans had laws like dictating how many Black people it would take to overrule like a white man's testimony if there was a dispute, like just sort of incredibly racist stuff. And then sort of the 1922 thing, the 1922 rebellion that we talk about in the book, one of the characters accuses Mondaugen of broadcasting his spherics too loudly over the land and causing them to uprise. That's not true. I guess you might guess like that's a Pynchon made up fact. It was more tax policy, specifically policies to tax dogs, because the Nama people used a lot of hunting dogs, and if you could tax the dogs, they'd have less hunting dogs and would be more likely to have to be like employees of white settlers.
Yeah, and I'll add like a couple of notes to that. One is that, while Mondaugen is there, like the Germans are no longer, the colonists in charge, but they seem to still be living just fine. So Mondaugen frequents this guy Foppel's plantation house, and we'll get into that. But he is one of the sort of former perpetrators of the sort of 1904 to 1908 genocide. And so it's not like the German colonists that were formerly in charge were like driven out or necessarily punished in any significant way. They're still living large in their mansions and have the economic sort of control. I also wanted to highlight that, I was very dismayed. I was really hoping to find out that this genocide was not a real event, but as it turns out, it was very real and was sort of a mass slaughter of the Herero and Nama people, one of the first sort of genocides of the 1900s, and, involved concentration camps, people being driven into the desert where they died of starvation and dehydration, mass violence. And it was not acknowledged as a genocide by Germany until 2015, I read. So maybe in the Pynchon-esque theme of mirror time and clocks and the sort of specter of all of this still hanging over us, I think this clock is still kind of unwinding. I also read that a number after the genocide, the Germans took skulls back with them to Germany for obviously horribly unethical scientific research. And those hundreds of skulls have only very recently been repatriated to Namibia. And there's still some ongoing dialogue about remains and other artifacts being repatriated to Namibia from Germany.
Yeah, I think your point about the timescales there is really important. I think it is possible to look at this in a modern context. This book was written in the 1960s, and it's possible to look at this in a modern context where like information about historical atrocities is not easy to come by and is oftentimes buried and not acknowledged, but it is perhaps easier to find these kinds of sources using our contemporary communication networks and the internet and our a lot of like public history, and people talk more about these things. Does not seem, given, as you just said, Germany's response today, that was always the case, especially in this particular genocide. And it seems that a lot of the facts that Pynchon is drawing on here specifically come from this 1918 report from the Southwest African Administrator's Office called Report on the Natives of Southwest Africa and Their Treatment by Germany. And so a lot of the very specific violent imagery and a lot of the facts and figures and numbers that are reported, or a lot of the really violent imagery that is fantasized about later in the chapter, is drawn sometimes nearly word for word from this particular report. And I can link to it in the show notes because it is also just available on archive.org as a scan. But I do think that there is some interesting credit where it's due to writing a novel and including this extremely violent, but certainly at the time and still today probably little known series of atrocities that were perpetrated by like a major world nation in another major part of the globe, and for hundreds of thousands of people who were killed or affected or displaced by it, and generations after generation, which dovetails into the kind of larger overarching theme of this chapter, which is the way in which this particular genocide and the economical standardization of genocide become a kind of dress rehearsal for the Holocaust that Nazi Germany would perpetrate, only a few decades later. Pynchon even directly references these facts at one point and says that the numbers from this Herero and Nama genocide, stacked against 6 million deaths, sort of pale in comparison, but there's like a sarcastic remark on the part of the narrator, which is to say Kurt Mondagen, which is to say Stenzel, which is kind of to say Pynchon, that those figures were not half bad in a competition, if that were your goal. So I think there's a lot going on here. Again, also not to attach too much credit to a white American author for like really speaking truth to power about this genocide that he has no personal connection to. But it is maybe worth thinking about, especially in a modern context, about like the research that one would have to put in order to write about some of this stuff back in the day as compared to now is an intriguing thing to consider, and feels very different than Thomas Pynchon walking into a library and not knowing how to write a short story for one of his classes at Cornell and finding this guidebook to Egypt by Carl Baedeker. Like, I think you can see a development of that process from those early experiments with this kind of thing to, okay, well, what if you use that interest and impetus in research to talk about something more politically grounded and pointed, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Pynchon still had to go in sort of find out about this, because I'm guessing he didn't, he probably found this out through his research and then at some point decided that seems like a nice spot to put my fun little characters and like write, continue my story on the back of this real world event, even if he is sort of bringing it to light in a way. I mean, I guess he's bringing it to light to me because I didn't know about it before now, but he is still...
I mean, I think for a lot of readers, this is probably... Readers of this book probably encounter the fact of this genocide for the first time reading this book. Certainly,
probably the only time. Like, it probably doesn't come up again in your day-to-day life, but Pynchon still thought it would be a fun spot to sort of write his book and make some money off of it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to give him that much credit, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. I think that's fair. We have some more discussions about history here that I think are worth talking about in the first section. I think we already talked about the fantastic clock you mentioned, Duri, but that comes up here. There's another line here that history, the proverb says, is made at night. The European civil servant normally sleeps at night. What waits in his inn basket to confront him at 9 a.m. is history. He doesn't fight it. He tries to coexist with it. And there's a lot of meditations on capital H history throughout this chapter.
I think that's an interesting thing, because I mean, this is being spoken by Van Wyck, who's like a presumably Dutch bureaucrat. I guess in this exact instance, South Africa is in the same time zone as Europe, but for most of Europe's colonial holdings spread around the world, it would literally, like, other people's daytime is when England is asleep. The sun doesn't set on the British Empire because it's spread out so diffusely, and so it would be kind of most people wake up in the morning and read a paper to find out that something has happened in their colonial holdings on the other side of the planet, like literally while they're sleeping, and not just because this guy clocks out at 5 p.m.
Yeah.
So then
Mondagan flees.
And
pretty quickly into this chapter ends up at this sort of bacchanal that's taking place at Foppel's Baroque plantation house. Every night since Mondagan has arrived, he is, there's a party going on at this house, and this is where he flees to when he's running from the rebellion, and he ends up there, and basically, there are people already there partying, other people have arrived, kind of fleeing this rebellion, and the group basically decides, oh, there's this rebellion going on, quote unquote, we're under siege, bolt the doors, and we're going to have a siege party. And they just decide to sort of like party for months while whatever is happening in the outside world happens.
Yeah, so the Foppel estate is surrounded on multiple sides by a ravine that's described as being like 200 feet deep, I think, at one point. And then, they just sort of continue on this plantation, and their only experience of what is actually happening in this 1922 rebellion is like what they occasionally see on the horizon from either Mondagan's turret, or they've got a wall, it seems like, as well, that they patrol.
And they watch it as sort of like entertainment.
Yeah, they're all very obsessed with like watching the violence as it unfolds. But like until the very end of the chapter, I mean, while I was reading this, I was like, I'm not sure if there is a rebellion happening. Like, it might be that they've imagined a rebellion is about to occur and put together this party and lock themselves in. And then I was like, the catch might be in 2 months they come out and they're like, nothing has happened. You guys have just been in there for 2 months by yourselves. That's not what occurs, but you don't see much of the actual violence of the 1922 rebellion until like the very end of the chapter.
Historically, I think does indeed only involve several hundred people. We are not talking about thousands against thousands here. Although I guess it's a fairly localized part of the country, so even a few hundred people moving across it at any rate would catch parts of the landscape in fighting. But yeah, we are very much in. I mentioned Poe earlier. This also feels very much like Boccaccio's Decameron, where a bunch of rich aristocrats trying to escape the plague flee to a country estate and It's called the Decameron because every night they tell 10 stories, each of them sort of like going around in a circle, and it's a mosaic kind of series of stories or novel that inspired Poe and also feels very relevant here.
Yeah, it felt very, maybe not entirely reminiscent, but in some ways reminiscent of the pandemic when we see people sort of locking themselves away. And, you know, they mentioned that they have, even after 2 months of this siege party and eating and drinking to excess, like there are still tomatoes in the garden and animals to be slaughtered. Like such was the wealth of Fopple's estate. So he has so much wealth that he can like float a decadent party for like 2.5 months, like nonstop for this giant group of people and still have resources within the walls of his estate.
This is of zero preparation too. He's been holding a party every night this week already, and he's still prepared for a 2.5 month siege.
Yeah, it's interesting that we get at the start of this section, we know that Mondagon leaves after about 2.5 months, but then it takes us a long time to return to this scene of him leaving.
Whole chapter.
Yeah, it takes the whole rest of the chapter to return to this scene of him leaving. First, he sets up in a turret. He puts all of his antennas up top. This also feels very like Gothic or vampire castle-esque.
It also felt to me like Benny Profane up in his up
in the crow's nest,
up in the crow's nest, like looking down at everything. I was reminded of that when we were looking at like Mondagon, like up in his turret, looking down at everything.
And Mondagon, the moon eyes, is oftentimes called a voyeur in this chapter, and also an écouteur because he's both listening and watching.
I was going to say, the Benny Profane analogy, I mean, obviously, yeah, we hear about Mondagon being a voyeur constantly. He's a self-proclaimed voyeur, but also the reference to the earlier part of the chapter was not the crow's nest for me, but the sort of living in the turret felt a lot like Profane living in the bathtub. Like, sort of like he's sleeping in a spot that people wouldn't normally sleep. He's effectively isolated himself away from the rest of the people who are living in regular bedrooms throughout the rest of the house. So yeah, a lot of Benny Profane parallels.
Are we eventually going to get a chapter where Stencil makes a stencilized version of Benny Profane, and we truly converge the narrative stylings? It's probably a little too pat for Pynchon. New V alert. We got a new V in the mix.
Vera.
New V.
Vera Meroving.
She's quite the V.
She's quite
indeed,
the V.
she is. There's also a V of blood on the ground that sort of like flows behind this creepy door that presages Mondagon's meeting with the new V.
And kind of a V of sunlight.
Kind of a V of sunlight.
We see the sun come back as the sinister character that it is in this chapter.
Yeah. Well, because Mondagon's got moon eyes, and he's always looking at the sun and thinking about it. So what's the deal with new V? Vera.
He's got one eye. Well, having one eye is not the part that's weird. The fact that the other eye, it is the not real eye that is the weird part. It's mechanical.
What's weird about the weird eye?
It has the zodiac signs etched into it, like around the cornea, much like a clock has symbols etched in a circle around a cornea. But clocks don't have corneas. Forget I said that part.
It was a good point up until that part.
Yeah, I really messed it up.
Yeah, Thomas Pynchon, I think he invents steampunk right here with this like 1920s woman with like a mechanical clockwork eyeball who is involved in sinister world historical plots.
Also, we talked a little bit about my namesake, St. Lucille, in a previous chapter, St. Lucy, and how, she had her eyes taken out and is often depicted as holding her eyes sort of on a platter.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly how Vera is described here. She removes the eye and holds it out to him in the hollow of her hand. So she's literally depicted like St. Lucy with her sort of eye removed.
Yeah, and maybe it's worth talking about sort of what she's doing here. So he keeps running into her in the halls, and come to find out that she is on the trail of the elder Hugh Godolphin now. For what reason? Who could say?
This is the same Godolphin from the last episode, just FYI.
I clarified that with Patrick before we rejoined, and I had him mixed up with Goodfellow. So I was going to save myself
You
that
and
embarrassment
Thomas.
on the podcast, but I will admit to all of you that the Goodfellow, Godolphin, Evan, Hugh, I've been a little lost in the G's.
It's fair. I don't think it's a coincidence that Godolphin and Goodfellow and Godrulfi, the florist,
the florist who did nothing wrong.
florist who sold two trees for the
Judas
price
trees.
of one.
The florist having the best week in his business's life.
Yeah, until there's like someone's carved into a painting and his trees are standing next to it.
Poor Godrulfi probably took the fall for that whole escapade.
Yeah, poor Godrulfi.
Which, by the way, there was a heist this weekend.
There were two art heists this weekend.
Two art heists. I heard about the one at the Louvre.
Don't you mean that happened several weekends ago?
Yes.
Because it is mid-November?
Yes.
Yes, several weekends ago, there was also a Picasso still life stolen out of Spain when the truck mysteriously parked for like 12 hours overnight. Ridiculous.
That is mysterious. I'm glad that in the weeks that followed, they solved these cases.
Yeah. Well, Patrick, what's the word for the name that means something? A looking forward name? Am I making that up? What did you call it?
A speaking name, a talking name. That is just, again, what I learned to call it in like Russian literature classes in college. And I haven't been able to find like
Seems
the
good
actual
enough.
reference for if they call that in Russian.
So Merovinge really stuck with me. I was thinking it was I was like, there's got to be a Merovingian thing here somewhere. I don't think there's a Merovingian thing here. Through a lot of etymology and root analysis, I have come up with Mero, Greek for partial, Ving, Norwegian for wing. Which
Partial
part wing
wing.
by itself doesn't mean a lot, but there are a lot of bird names in this chapter.
There are a lot of
Everyone
bird
has
names
a
in this
bird
chapter.
name in this chapter. So I think
Yeah.
there's something.
I have
There's
a
something
less
with birds.
exciting interpretation of her last name, but I like the wing. I wrote this down somewhere, and I don't remember where I wrote it, but I believe Meroving is like the surname of a particular group of Franks. I looked this up.
Oh yeah, that's the Merovingians.
Yeah, the Merovingians.
Do other people know about the Merovingians?
I know about the Merovingians
Because
because
of
there's a character in the Matrix called the Merovingian.
Merovingian.
Oh, here I thought I was being very clever learning about the Merovingians.
No, yeah, you could tell us about the Merovingian.
I just read that they were like an early group of like Franks, and I assumed that was like some sort of like pre-German
Yeah.
descent
Yes.
related to this whole German colonialism
This
situation.
is what J. Cary Grant and others have concluded per the companion to V, is that it is sort of a testament to sort of like blue-blooded royalty, a line of kings that is definitive of her place in this story, and that it is just a Merovingian thing. But I'm compelled by
I'm going to
the
stick with my stencil-esque.
Yeah.
There's a Greek and a Norwegian, two parents who've done a portmanteau last name for their daughter.
let's see what happens.
So Mondaugan is out on the roof putting his antennas up, and Vera comes out in her slip, and he starts peeping.
And then she sees him peeping.
Sees him instantly and tells him to come up to her side of the roof, and then he falls off the roof. But then
Very
he does
Benny
eventually.
Profane.
Benny, very Godolphin. Oh no,
You're both talking about Porpentine.
I got you.
There's too many characters in this book.
Very someone. But then he does eventually get up to the roof, or her part of the roof. And while they're talking, almost instantly, this Lieutenant Weissman comes up, and Mondaugan becomes very self-conscious about the quote-unquote conspiracy that he and Vera now have, which I guess is presumably that they are somehow romantically involved. And it gets to the point that that's like it's very concerning to him over the rest of this chapter as he continues to run into Vera every single place he goes. And then a couple of times he also has close encounters with Weissman when he's concerned that Weissman is about to confront him for having an affair and then doesn't do that because he's not. But he's sort of dogged by this faux pas that he believes he's committed throughout the rest of this chapter.
Weissman, meanwhile, a much simpler speaking name.
Very easy speaking name.
Just means white man in German. But is also a very common name.
He also, on a walk to find a generator for his electronics, he meets Hedwig Vogelsong, German for bird song, bird name. They dance.
Is Hedwig a bird name, or is that just me associating with Harry Potter?
I think that's just the name that is then later the owl in Harry Potter.
Later the owl,
I believe.
Scratch that.
There's potentially like a young German girl somewhere reading Harry Potter who the owl had her name the whole time.
It's come full circle.
Anyway, he dances with this teenage girl under a gigantic model of the solar system that is run via a treadmill, which is also very steampunk and very cool, except for the fact that Fopple uses a slave to run it, which is not cool at all. But the fact that it exists, like, this would be cool in like a kid's museum. This seems like something that would be in a kid's museum where you like walk on the treadmill and it does the roof ceiling thing. It's also very Avatar: The Last Airbender when they're spinning to figure out when the eclipse is going to occur so that they can beat the Fire Nation.
Yeah, we
just watched that episode.
Watched that episode for the Duri's first time going through Avatar: The Last Airbender. So I'm glad you didn't spoil any reveals.
We should have a Avatar: The Last Airbender watch along podcast instead. Follow us on Patreon.
Yeah. Surely the Patreon will be up by now. Did you catch? There's an error here, Andrew. That as
I usually catch when people say messed up things about the solar system in a book.
Yep,
I'm very on that. I didn't notice anything. What was it?
Pynchon writes, or I guess this could be Stencil's error, but
it's always the narrator's error, Patrick, and never the author's. We know this.
But Pluto was not discovered till 1930. It says there's 9 planets.
Oh, I was okay. I was not to after I've said I didn't notice an error, be like, but I was like 9 planets in 1922. I was like, okay, I didn't realize that I was like, they really had it more pinned down than I thought they did, and they didn't.
Yeah, I didn't catch this either.
Anachronism that we've caught Pynchon in.
I'm sure there's more, and all of the acronyms are intentional and thematic. But
it is the 1950s when he's telling this story, so it might be that Mondaugen is like, yeah, there were 9 planets. That's how many planets there are.
Or Stencil.
Eigenvalue interrupts him later on when he is, we'll get here maybe again, but Eigenvalue interrupts him when he's talking about a song that they're singing that is rhyming in English, and Eigenvalue interrupts Stencil in a parenthetical, kind of like Benny showed up in a parenthetical way back when, to say, like, did he know English at the time? Were they speaking English? Why is this rhyming?
Oh, yeah.
It was that parenthetical that I, like, as I said, missed the framing device for this chapter. And I got to that parenthetical and I was like, wait, is this another one of Stencil's stories? And then I had to go back and I found the framing device and everything clicked into place. But I was like, where did Eigenvalue come from?
So, yeah, this meeting with Hedwig, I think, is where this chapter really, to use a bird metaphor, starts to take flight in both its depravity and its Gothicism with this solar system, and then also the as Mondaugen progresses out of this planetarium, he comes across Fopple, I believe, who is whipping a black man, presumably the man who normally runs on the treadmill in order to power the planetarium, with a sjambok, a word I was not familiar with, but which is a type of whip that is traditionally made from like rhinoceros hide. Sambok.
Yeah, and to provide a little background on Fopple, we learn that he was one of the, as I think I mentioned earlier, perpetrators of this genocide, and he idolizes this individual, is it Von Troth?
Von Trotha.
Von Trotha,
who was the real person who sort of led this genocide against the Herero and Nama people. And Fopple sees him as his hero and idolizes him and worked under him, and really has this nostalgia for 1904 and wants to go back to this awful period.
And starts insisting that people around the estate start dressing and making themselves up as if they were in 1904.
Yeah, and I think we have this running thread of nostalgia that has been showing up, throughout. Benny talks about the sort of nostalgia for the 1930s, and I think that connects to our vision of time, and
specifically nostalgia for what happened roughly 20 years before.
Yeah, and I think there was a mention earlier of romanticizing sort of the past, and they Pynchon talked at one point about sort of making musicals about decades past, and I don't know. I think there's something interesting there with the connection between that and Fopple, who is sort of romanticizing and wanting to go back to this time of horrific violence.
Yeah, from just how the story is going perspective, Van Wyck, the bureaucrat, specifically originally tells Mondaugan, you should get out of the country if an uprising is happening. But then when Mondaugan says, I'm not going to do that, he says, go to Fopple and tell Fopple that it's the time of Von Trotha's return, basically. Go ask him about this guy. You'll get sort of a story.
And a story he gets.
Mondaugan does get, for sure. As far as my comment on the nostalgia, the idea of nostalgia here, we talked earlier about sort of nostalgia for the time of your birth, the decade of your birth being the thing that you were nostalgic for at all times, while Fopple would have been a young man, 16, 17, 18 when he would have been here in the military. And I guess what that could mean for, I don't know if it's so much of a rebirth for him. This is the thing that he is looking back to is not his birth. It is the beginning of a second life he has in Africa as a colonist instead of just a kid in Germany.
And I think it's worth mentioning here that part of a thing, and Pynchon sort of obliquely references this, but Von Trotha gives this kind of infamous, it's not extremely well known, obviously, but gives this infamous extermination order, as it's called, that renders in pretty, statement of fact bureaucratic terms. This is quoted in J. Cary Grant, but it's also reproduced elsewhere. I, the great general of the German troops, in this letter to the Herero people. Hereros are no longer German subjects. They have murdered, stolen, they have cut off noses, ears, and other bodily parts, etc., etc. I say to the people, anyone who delivers one of the Herero captains to my station as a prisoner will receive 1,000 marks. And then he gives a list of particular Herero kind of leaders who he would like to see delivered to him, and then concludes, all Hereros must leave the land. If people do not do this, then I will force them to do it with the great guns. Any Herero found within the German borders, with or without a gun, with or without cattle, will be shot. I shall no longer receive any women or children. I will drive them back to their people, or I will shoot them. This is my decision for the Herero people, the great general of the mighty Kaiser. And then later on, there is a further letter that is sent to German infantry that Von Trotha gives that says that you should also read this, although it is not directed to the Herero people, that the shooting of women and children is to be understood to mean that one can shoot over them to force them to run faster. I definitely mean that this order will be carried out and that no male prisoners will be taken, but it should not degenerate into killing women and children. And so there is ostensibly this kind of double speak of, we are now in the business of exterminating all of these people. Nominally, as a way of cover, you should not be doing this, but, this extermination order, I think, is exactly what it says on the tin. And I do think it's this particular, very modern impulse to have this filter down through a kind of bureaucracy that is indicative to Pynchon of what would later come to pass in, the Holocaust and other sorts of global genocides. That this is perpetrated through official letters and documentation, and that is a thing that Europe is bringing to the world.
Yeah, and we even get some foreshadowing to the Holocaust when Weissman approaches Mondagen.
Mondagen, yeah.
And he is clearly, I don't have my timeline exactly on the growth of the Nazi Party, but sort of an early follower. And he's
they're
asking
from Munich.
Yeah.
Well,
and so
Mondagen's from Leipzig, but he's educated in Munich.
And Weissman is like, oh, you're from Munich. And then he's like, have you heard of all these people, like Mussolini, Hitler? And Mondagen says so many capital letters, which kind of reminded me of Paula's proper nouns from a number of chapters ago. And Weissman is like, from Munich, and you've never heard of Hitler, as if Hitler were the name of an avant-garde play. What the hell's wrong with young people? So,
which feels, again, like there's a flash of the whole sick crew here of sort of the entanglement of politics and aesthetics that was, as Walter Benjamin writes about in the essay The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, essential to fascism and its rise.
So, yeah, and then Mondagen says, I'm an engineer, you see, politics isn't my line. But we already know that Mondagen becomes an engineer of military aircraft for the Nazis. So we get kind of an interesting foreshadowing here, and they conclude their conversation. Politics is a kind of engineering, isn't it, with people as your raw material. And so there's this, kind of connection drawn between politics and engineering that we kind of, as the reader, have some knowledge of how those come together later in Mondagen's life.
There's a point a little bit later on when Weissman returns and basically asks, how's it going? How's your research going? And he makes the comment that I don't have the exact page in front of me right now, but he's basically like, they need it. They need to know what you're looking for. And presumably being his higher ups back in, it sounds as if he has reported back to Germany in some way that this research is occurring, and they've instructed him, get this research, find this research, which is interesting.
Yeah, and Weissman seems to think that he's cracking some sort of code, but also Mondagen has kind of convinced himself that he's cracking some sort of code with these spherics. Yeah, even though there really is no rhyme or reason to be found in them.
It's interesting with, I guess, the Nazis' known obsession with occult material, to sort of think about it like that. I'm not sure how well documented that would have been in the 1960s, although it does show up in Indiana Jones, so I guess they knew about it by the 70s and the 80s for sure. But thinking about it, I mean, at the end we get Weissman's attempt to crack the code, and it does feel very like this is from aliens, these are aliens speaking to us.
Oh, I can't wait till we get to the code, but I'm gonna save my comments for later on. Let's see. Around here, or Mondagen has a dream of. Is this where he dreams that he's
a fashion party?
Yeah, at the fashion party in Munich, which he does not take to naturally.
And what is Fasching, Patrick?
It's like Lent in Munich.
Carnival.
Yeah.
Carnival.
Mardi Gras.
Yeah.
The pre-Lenten celebration. Yeah. And, we get sort of a description of what is going on in this, beer hall in Munich full of, one, this giant black oak clock, and two, a bunch of, heaving, sweaty bodies rubbing up against each other that is also seemingly indicative of what is going on in the Fasching party that is taking place at Foppel's estate.
Oktoberfest gets all the publicity, but Fasching seems like it would be a fun time to go to.
Certain Fasching, certainly. Yeah.
Not the Foppel Fasching, but the actual in Munich Fasching seems like a fun party.
Although they seemed like they were all, I mean, he kept talking about the kind of Weimar Republic and the depression and inflation in Germany, and everyone is starving.
Not in the 1920s. The 1920s Weimar Republic was in a really bad economic situation.
Bad time. Yeah, he says everyone seems sort of like they have consumption, like they're all very pale.
Yeah, a lot of this imagery echoes the like white sickliness that our beer hall waitress noticed back in, I know I've referenced her, what is her name?
Hannah.
Yeah, I referenced her a couple times this episode, but like Thomas Pynchon keeps returning to this scene of the German beer hall in this
not a stencil chapter without one.
Yeah, it's not a stencil chapter without one, and also feels, extremely it does feel like we are foreshadowing, the Hitler and the Nazi Party's beer hall push that would be soon coming. So there's a equation of the beer hall and global politics and politics of extermination that are happening throughout this book. We already kind of talked about Godolphin and Vera having a lot of tense conversations, but this is I guess we got to particularly
meet Godolphin first.
Yeah, we meet Godolphin.
Surprise, Godolphin's here.
Godolphin's here.
He's been trying to get to Antarctica. Surprise, surprise.
He's going back.
South Africa, apparently last stop on the way to Antarctica. He was trying to commandeer a ship, but it hadn't worked out yet. And he's looking for, guess what?
Is it Visu?
Visu!
And then is later seen chatting with Vera. And they have a twisty, confusing conversation about how they were both at places that maybe neither of them were, or both of them were. This feels like prime V material, or the kind of thing where, as Kurt Mondagen is talking about it, Stencil is just going nuts.
And sort of oddly central to this conversation is this actress named Eleonora Duse.
Yeah, I believe so. I think
Duse?
She might be Italian, so
she
it could be
Italian.
Duse. Yeah, could be Duse.
Yeah, from the late 1800s, who had an affair with this man named D'Annunzio, who then wrote a novel inspired by his affair with the Deuce, as she was called. And that is like not really discussed. I mean, and the novel was called Il Fuoco. And so they're kind of referring to this novel and D'Annunzio throughout their conversation.
And D'Annunzio's politics. Did you look these up?
I missed his politics.
So basically, he writes this.
Do you see what I mean? I felt like Stencil while I was like, oh, I got it. Oh, Eleanor. Oh, that's who D'Annunzio is. And it's related to Il Fuoco. And
I gave this Google up. I was like, I'm going to just let it happen.
Yeah.
Whatever they're talking about.
There's several threads here. The main thread, and you covered the part about the novel. And once again, we're in sort of like an art and politics relation here, and specifically art and its relationship to fascism. D'Annunzio was something of a war hero in World War I, and then became a certain type of Italian nationalist figure who basically tried to secede from the Paris Peace Conference agreement in Fiume, which is, I believe, now in Croatia, and according to some stuff I was reading, like styled himself Il Duce, which is later the term that Mussolini would use to define himself, and Mussolini's supporters would use to call him. And he was this particular kind of like nationalist figure who meandered in and around Italian fascism in the decades that would follow, but also had an influence on Italian socialism and anti-fascism. And so this is what they are talking about when they talk about Fiume and the gunboats that are raining artillery down atop them was this kind of short-lived nationalist secessionist conflict off of Italy that is inspired in large part by this war hero and novelist, Gabriele D'Annunzio. Interesting fellow.
It's important, I guess, to note that Vera here is asking about Vaisu, and Godolphin is saying, did I talk to you about Vaisu before? And she's like, yeah, you did. And he's like, I don't know. That she's sort of pulling this out of him. And I mean, she continues to like hunt him down throughout the rest of this chapter. But then when it mentions that she was also in Florence, I was like, whoa.
Wow.
I saw a theory online that she is Victoria.
I was thinking that she was Victoria. I'm stencil pilled.
I like reread these pages several times after I saw that and tried to figure out a way to get there. And I'm not seeing it particularly, but I did want to know what you guys' thoughts were.
I was like trying to find an anagram in her name that would lead me to Victoria Wren, and I didn't get there, but Stencil has thoroughly gotten under my skin, and I was absolutely wondering whether Vera was Victoria.
Yeah, my thought here, I feel like there's a Hegelian interpretation of some of this, and maybe this will be confirmed later in the text.
I did a little Googling about Hegel as well.
I don't know if this is the thing you were Googling, but Hegel had this idea of like a world spirit or a world soul, a Weltgeist, that was sort of like a driving force of world historical power and separate from a Zeitgeist, the spirit of the times, or a Volkgeist, a spirit of the people, but this like eternal world soul that is pushing world history toward an ultimate kind of end. It's like a super simplified version
like
of
Forrest
Hegel.
Gump.
And yeah, like Forrest Gump. Forrest Gump is kind of a Hegelian world-soul. Tune in to check out my new conference paper on the subject. But famously, Hegel described Napoleon as like the world soul on horseback. And I can't stop thinking that like V is this kind of very Pynchon-esque world soul type figure. Except my suspicion is that we're going to get to the end of all of this, and that kind of animating, centralizing, central figure will be revealed to be, like everything else, kind of a fiction or an evaporation that is never actually the driving force of anything, or maybe does not even exist. But I feel like V feels like this kind of thing for Stencil.
Can I ask a follow-up question? And
is maybe embodied in one or several women with the name V, and maybe rockets sometimes.
World soul. Is it, I'm not too well read on Hegel, is it a situation where one person embodies the world soul at a time and it moves around, or is it just individuals have the power of the world soul and sort of independently have great power over society?
It's kind of like anti-individualistic. That history is motivated by its own kind of internal spirit or will, separate from any individual, except I think this is sort of the flippant-ish point that Hegel was maybe making in a certain type of figure like Napoleon. And you can also easily see how like a fascist or nationalistic rhetoric can be built up around this idea where like there is a destiny of Italy, or there is a destiny of Germany, and it is the responsibility of Germans or Italians to like seize that destiny that the world has in store for it.
I'm going to keep this in mind with whoever our next major V lady is.
We shall see.
Had another part of this conversation that I wanted to pull out.
Yeah.
Which was, he says, take your friend Denuncio, whether we like it or not, that war destroyed a kind of privacy, perhaps the privacy of dream, committed us like him to work out 3 o'clock anxieties, excesses of character, political hallucinations on a live mass, a real human population. The discretion, the sense of comedy about the Vesu affair are with us no more. Our Vesus are no longer our own, or even confined to a circle of friends, their public property. And I think this, like the other passage that we were reading earlier about the rat's nest, felt very prescient to me, that like the privacy has been destroyed and our sort of like private imaginaries or like private reveries are no longer private and they're being worked out in this very like public sphere. In his case, it was sort of this novel about this affair that he'd had. It was how I interpreted this, was that like, and I hadn't done all the reading about the politics, but I was kind of like his sort of sordid affair with the deuce was like made public, and his sort of like 3 o'clock anxieties were then shared with like a large human population. And then he was comparing that to Vesu, and I don't know, I just felt like it kind of felt relevant with social media and like private anxieties and affairs being sort of fanned out for like really like the masses to see and consume.
An astute point after which Vera brains a goldfish in the pond with a rock. Poor goldfish. No, I think you're exactly right. Demolishing a goldfish or not.
I don't know if that felt relevant to you guys as well, but it stuck out to me as a passage that felt like it hadn't gone stale since Thomas Pynchon had written this.
Yeah, towards the we have some more goings on that we've already discussed between Weissman and Mondagen about who exactly is spying or sending messages to whom. They sort of agree to work together to crack this code that they
agree to work together. But I felt like Mondagen was kind of like playing with Weissman a little bit. Like Weissman really thinks there's a code, and Mondagen's like, yeah, sure, there's a code. You want to come figure out the code? But
later on, he spends a lot of time trying to crack the code. I think like in his fever, the code becomes very
later
real
on.
to
but
him.
At this point, I feel like he's kind of messing with.
I feel like Mondagen is thinking there's a code, more of there's a repetitive pattern that can be used to, as opposed to him just being like, I heard a whoop and then another whoop. He can be like, okay, there were whoops at like similar intervals and they get split up by a whew or whatever noise, and you can sort of make a pattern that helps you scientifically deduce what is occurring here. Whereas Weissman is in full, like, the aliens are sending us messages. I need to get this back to the Nazi party, like, mode. Like, he's like, there's spies, we're spying on someone, or there's extraterrestrials or some other, like, force beyond humanity that is doing this. And they're sort of both trying to solve the code, but from different perspectives on, like, what it is sort of the vibe I got.
And then they end up both listening to what Pynchon describes as a single deafening pulse of laughter that causes them to both freeze in their tracks, which is, as Weissman says here, I believe this is the first mention of it, the Strand Wolf.
Which we get no further explanation of until later on.
But
it's a hyena.
The Strand Wolf will continue to appear in the rest of this chapter. Yeah, I think that the tail end of this section, like, looking back on it now, it does feel like this chapter is kind of divided in two, where we get introduced to all of this cast of characters, and then we get into this hellish fever dream of genocidal mania that happens later, which begins a little bit with Foppel is standing on tiptoe to kiss one of the portraits of von Trotha that he has hanging around, and he talks about, I'll just read this quote, I loved the man, he said. He taught us not to fear. It's impossible to describe the sudden release, the comfort, the luxury, when you knew you could safely forget all the rote lessons you'd had to learn about the value and dignity of human life. Till we've done it, we're taught that it's evil. Having done it, that's the struggle, to admit to yourself that it's not really evil at all, that like forbidden sex, it's enjoyable. And this is the, I think, early indication of the entire psychology that Mondagen will begin to inhabit in the second half of the chapter, that to be relieved of conscience or to be relieved of the angst of other people and to see everyone around you as beneath you or inhuman or inanimate in a certain kind of way. This feels like deeply psychologically revealing to me of both what is being discussed here, but also, like, I think this is kind of what is going on in the kind of anti-woke discourse right now, which is like a bunch of people who feel relieved of the burden of having to think about what other people think of what they say, and to sort of this like speak your mind rhetoric, or like the anti-cancel culture rhetoric, feels of a piece with this. I'm not saying it's necessarily genocidal, but like there's some relations perhaps. Then Mondagen sings a little song to get Weissman to go to sleep.
No, he gets...
Godolphin thinks he is his son.
Yeah, he meets Godolphin.
Yes, that's what I meant. I said Weissman. I meant Godolphin.
Yeah, Godolphin thinks he is his son, and then Godolphin is clearly kind of out of his mind.
And Vera has convinced him that Mondagen is Evan.
Yeah, like, is Vera a witch? Like, what exactly is going... maybe we just don't know the answer to this, but has she, like, put a spell on Godolphin? Has she hypnotized him?
I think he's just old and confused.
Yeah.
I thought it was, like, sinister.
I mean, it's definitely sinister. She's doing 100% something.
Sinister, but I think she's just taking advantage of a man now in his 70s, mid to late 70s. And we
Towards
have to
what end?
That's what the stencil-esque plot, like that, I think, is maybe the stencil part of it. Like, it might, like, you can, I think, imagine a world where Mondagen is like, yeah, there's this lady named Vera with one eye. She hung out a lot with this guy named Godolphin.
Who later started thinking I was his son.
Yeah, like, that's it. But Stencil knowing Godolphin and specifically looking for Godolphin probably keyed in on that maybe more than Mondagen might have said. I guess it's also worth pointing out that I guess in the history of the Godolphins that we're putting together, Evan's only been dead a couple years max, right? Like, if the war ended in 1918, he died 6 months after his plane crash. It's a relatively fresh wound for Hugh.
Does Evan die at the end of that? We last see him in the hospital. He just gets his
face.
We see him in the hospital, but he talks about how he's only got like a few months before, because he's like, I'm going to be like these other guys whose bodies are rejecting all these foreign parts.
I don't know if he dies, though, if his face is just like disfigured.
Yeah, I could see both ways. I had sort of assumed that it was like until his face sort of started sloughing off and he would be worse off than he began, but I could also see that he died after that.
I'll go back and look at that.
Yeah.
I thought he died.
Yeah, I think it's important that Mondagen sings a song about dreams. This is all sort of taking place in a dream, and he's about to have a lot of dreams. It's taking place in Stencil's dream.
Yeah, and the imagery here is getting increasingly more dreamlike. Like, there's a lot of like walking down white ramps between mirrors and past tapestries, through drapes, around corners. It really feels like you're in this sort of like dreamlike labyrinth of the home, like sometimes coming across dead bodies, sometimes coming across blood, sometimes hearing like the cackling laughter of like a strand wolf, occasionally hearing like a chorus that begins like singing sort of like a funerary song.
Oh, this is actually, speaking of which, I wanted to mention this, and speaking of birds, there's a double meaning of the dawn chorus that shows up a couple different times.
Dies R.I.?
The Dies Irae?
Yeah, thank you.
That's like a day of wrath, I think.
That's what I looked at. It's like a medieval Latin poem used at funeral mass.
There's that, but there's also when the sun is coming up, and Mondagen talks about like this chorus of sounds. There's both a dawn chorus, which is bird songs. And we already talked about Hedwig and her last name Bird Song, where the birds start waking up, and everybody is familiar with this. But there is also an electromagnetic dawn chorus that, if you are like listening in on the spheric wavelengths, shortly after dawn or like at dawn, there is a chorus of electromagnetic noise caused by some kind of, Wikipedia says, Doppler shifted cyclotron interaction between anisotropic distributions of energetic electrons that happens during the dawn. And so it has been so named because it like resembles the chorus of birds at the dawn of the day.
Interesting.
Birds also like make little whistling noises and stuff, so he's kind of constantly listening to bird songs. Shall we take a break before diving into the last part of this chapter?
Went in and looked for that quote real fast.
Yeah.
Evan Godolphin just makes, he talks about how his face is going to react to the foreign body syndrome, and that he's only got 6 months to sort of have his current face before the paraffin and the stuff really starts to go bad. And then Schoenmacher asks him what is he going to do, and he says he doesn't know, but it's going to be a grand 6 months. So I guess he's not necessarily dead, but he's got 6 months either before he dies or his face is just so messed up that he can't live a normal life anymore.
I wanted to bring up one more thing in this section before we
break.
We're 2:45 in. Why even break it? We'll just
this might need to be 2 episodes. A little bit earlier, a few pages back, they talked about, or it spoke about Mondagen roaming the house. And it says, he took to roaming the house at odd hours at loose ends. Like the eye in his dream of Fasching, he now found he had a gift of visual serendipity, a sense of timing, a perverse certainty about not whether, but when to play the voyeur. And I just thought that was a really interesting phrasing. It reminded me of a video camera. Like, he is the eye that's like watching all this take place and like shifting his view. It kind of reminded me of that scene that we had a while back with Porpentine in the opera that we said felt very much like it was being watched from like a bird's eye or like camera's eye view. And I like the idea of him as an eye with like a sense of timing as the voyeur, like watching this whole sort of event in this house play out. I don't know. That stood out to me as he's sort of taking almost on the role of like a documenter or like camera, also connecting to all of the eye imagery that's in this chapter and throughout the rest of the book.
Yeah, I think you're right. And he's also constantly looking into all of the halls seem to be placed with these like weirdly angled mirrors so that you can see around all of these corners without being witnessed yourself. Like he's climbing into these weird spaces and then like witnessing strange sexual acts or scenes of torture as he's wandering because there's all these mirrors around. And he even has one big mirror that is in his turret room, I believe, as well.
Yeah, talk about mirror time. Like he's constantly seeing things at weird angles or like slices of things through the mirrors. That's how, he observes Vera quite a lot through like a mirror.
Which is also how some cameras work.
Interesting. Okay, that's just what I wanted to bring up the camera.
Shall we break here for just a couple minutes and refill some water? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, sure.
Pynchon Pals. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We are still amidst the vampire castle of one Fopple. Do we ever learn Fopple's first name?
What if Fopple was his first name and we just never learned his last name?
It's like Mario. His name is Fopple.
Exactly.
Yeah, where comes next here?
Around the start of section 3 here was when I ran across Hegel. I have read no Hegel, I want to be clear, and I did not read Hegel for this podcast, but I Googled the word Herrenschaft, which comes up in the second paragraph starting this section, and it means like power, but like specifically, they're talking about like German culture and specifically make this reference to culture like Kultur, which is referring to sort of like a racist, fascist German culture.
Like a nationalistic kind of Germanness.
Yeah, and the Herrenschaft is referring to a type of power, at least from what I found, like Hegel came up when I Googled that word. It's often used to refer to the sort of like master servant or like lord bondsman.
Yeah, I think Lord Bondsman is the more contemporary, more accurate translation, but traditionally this has been referred to as like the master-slave dialectic.
Yeah, and it as far as I could tell, and please feel free to add to this because I have not actually read this, but I read the Wikipedia article. It talks about like two self-conscious beings being in a sort of like struggle to the death, and the one with the power obliterates the other, but in obliterating the other, they like obliterate the power that they have because the other who saw them as having power has been killed, if I'm understanding correctly.
I think that's basically right. This particular part of Hegel generally, I think, is a philosophical figure who filters into a lot of subsequent philosophical discourse, being kind of the most influential philosopher of his time period. Like the rest of philosophy after Hegel, especially in a continental European context. Hegel is kind of one of the break points between continental philosophy as it developed in France and Germany, and analytic philosophy as it developed in the Anglosphere in England and the United States. And so there's a lot of philosophical responses and resonances of Hegel, like Marx, for instance, is in a big way inspired by Hegel. One, in a sense of this kind of world spirit that progresses from feudalism into capitalism into eventually communism, that there is like an end of this historical movement, which is the liberation of the worker and sort of kind of communism. But also Marx, among other thinkers, was inspired by this kind of Lord Bondsman dialectic, and the extent to which it is to be understood at kind of like a big political scale or at a small scale political level, sort of like between individuals, or even in the kind of soul or spirit of a single person, we have this Lord Bondsman dialectic, I think is an item of debate among Hegel readers, I guess.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to go down too much of a like stencil-esque rabbit hole based on one word, but it felt relevant to the themes of the chapter. There's like a lot of this sort of like power dynamic going on, both like sexually and in a very like literal way in terms of like fopple, and then obviously the sort of genocidal fantasies that we will be fantasies and realities that we will be encountering shortly. It just felt relevant, this idea of like a power struggle between individuals, and also relevant to that sort of psychological note that you made at the end of the last section about this sort of feeling freed from the guilt of, you know, having power over other people.
And this comes right back in when Mondagen, sort of thinking through this in one of these feverish genocidal fantasies, starts talking about shame and being unashamed of the things that you were doing, being unashamed of committing these atrocities in front of your fellow soldiers, in front of the people on whom you were committing these atrocities. Yeah, that absence of shame and humanity becomes a running theme here. Go ahead, Andrew.
I was just going to say, this paragraph that Duri was just quoting from is the first sort of fopple invasion of Mondaugen's, what has otherwise been a purely Mondaugen-led narrative. And we start to get a lot of...
It slips in sort of like in between paragraphs. So the one that I came back to, you know, a paragraph suddenly begins, he was given a lovely mare named Fire Lily, how he adored that animal. And it, you know, the he here nominally refers to Mondaugen, but like there's no horse in the castle. We're just sort of slipping into this memory or reverie.
Yeah, kind of like he's slipping in and out of dreams.
That's definitely the one where I think it really hits you over the head that we're doing this back and forth. And then, I mean, this first paragraph is the second paragraph of the section. And then the third paragraph is immediately back to Mondaugen. Like, it's a very quick fopple, while like the last 6 pages or something of this section is just one long fopple. So it sort of, I mean, we find out that Mondaugan at this time is like actively dying of scurvy because he's refusing to eat in his turret while he's like held up with Godolphin, and you can see like as it's getting worse and worse from him and he starts to just be sort of in and out of consciousness, is sort of all he's able to do is fopple becomes more and more prevalent in the narrative.
Yeah, and Godolphin is in his room. He won't leave because he thinks that he's his son, and Godolphin also seems sort of out of it.
Yeah, they write Pynchon writes somewhere that like they adopted each other effectively as father and son.
Yeah, Mondaugan's also like not letting, I mean, I don't know if he's not letting Godolphin leave, but Vera comes at some point and like knocks on the door, and Mondaugan tells her that he's not leaving.
Yeah, and like Weissman tries to like infiltrate. I mean, he does infiltrate later, but
Weissman keeps coming in to like steal the results of the spheric signals.
Yeah, and at one point, does he even take the machine, or does he just take the?
He's taking it's, we skipped over this, I guess, but at the beginning of the chapter, it's just like a loudspeaker that the spheric receiver is connected to. But then once he moves into Fopple's house, he sets up a oscilloscope so that it can be like written down on paper. And so they've got like long scrolls of oscilloscope data.
Yeah, which is that thing that you see in like movies or, you know, in earthquake footage or something that's like, or a lie detector, I guess.
Yeah, like,
is that?
Yeah, lie detector. I mean, I think when you think of a modern oscilloscope, you think of like an electronics device. Yeah. But yeah, something on like 1990s printer paper that just goes on for a mile and you can just sort of make squiggly lines up and down is, I guess, what's happening here.
It scopes oscillations, makes a waveform. And yeah, Weissman is coming in and stealing those and is also beginning to dress like a woman from 1904 and is applying sort of smoky eye makeup like all of the women around the estate.
Yeah, as is Hedwig.
Is Hedwig.
And Godolphin.
Yeah.
At the end.
Indeed, and Godolphin by the very end of the chapter. Exactly where all of that is going, again, this is something that like Stencil kind of muses about earlier in the previous chapter, as Stencil is thinking about his own imposition of various identities of varied genders. I don't know exactly what to make of all of this, but perhaps a smarter reader or more astute critic in this area would have more to say. There's a section that particularly stood out to me, again, in this. This is one of those like quick shifts back into the Fopple headspace. Pynchon writes, "One could as well have been a stonemason. It dawned on you slowly, but the conclusion was irresistible. You were in no sense killing. The voluptuous feeling of safety, the delicious lassitude you went into the extermination with, was sooner or later replaced by a very curious, not emotion, because part of it was obviously a lack of what we commonly call feeling. Functional agreement would come closer to it. Operational sympathy." And this just feels very much like Pynchon is writing about Nazism and imperialist nationalistic extermination broadly. This kind of operationalization of violence. Later on, well, we'll get there when we get there. But Fopple, at this point, starts to compare the marches that he is making from one point to another with this long chain of prisoners and enslaved people behind him as resembling the dance of death that he saw in like the churches in Germany as a child.
Yeah, I tried to look up an image of that painting, but it seemed like there were a lot of variations.
Yeah, I think it's more of like a theme than a specific painting, or it's a motif that comes up a lot. If you've ever seen the movie The Seventh Seal, the Ingmar Bergman film, there's a famous sort of wide shot of the dance of death leading the characters along the ridge line of this hill. That's very much what came to mind here. And it's, in particular, this is a like capital R romantic kind of heightened sensual form of violence, even as it is operationalized. as later becomes clear, like, after this extermination campaign, this character we're identifying as Fopple starts to lament the formalization of the violence into not sort of outright extrajudicial, or actually judicial, killing, but in terms of like servitude and enslavement, and the shift from this dance of death to laying down train tracks in order to move resources and people more efficiently over the landscape also feels like it is calling forward to the trains to extermination camps that would follow in the Nazi regime.
And there's just, I mean, there's kind of pages on pages on pages of description of this violence in this chapter.
Including some of it which resembles, I think, violence that we've seen elsewhere in the book.
Yes.
There is a moment where a young girl is, like, assaulted and raped by the soldiers, and Pynchon writes that, like, she's smiling at the end of it, which very much feels like a callback to the last time we saw Fina back in the previous chapter.
Yeah, I also feel like there's, throughout this chapter, some descriptions of eyes that call back to the eyes of the girls, Lucille and the others, that Profane and crew go out with. So I do feel like there's definitely some reflections, if we will, in the mirror of this type of violence happening in the present day of the novel. Yeah, here's one quote. It says, clouds moved across those eyes. Whether reflected or transmitted, he'd never know. So I think describing in particular another victim, well, actually kind of maybe the most significant victim in Fopple's fantasies, Sarah.
Yeah, where does...
I skipped ahead a little bit finding that quote about the eyes.
Oh, no, you're totally fine. Yeah, I suppose here we get, this is the section I was referencing earlier. We jump ahead in this Fopple-esque fantasy to some years after his time in the army, during which time, Pynchon writes, the objectives were different. That may simply have been all. The harbor needed dredging, railroads had to be built inland from the seaports, which couldn't thrive by themselves any more than the interior could survive without them. Having legitimized their presence in the territory, the colonists were now obliged to improve what they had taken. And so he reflects on missing the kind of pure, senseless violence of his army campaign in 1904, as opposed to this employment. Employment in a, not, obviously they're not being paid, but utilitarian function of this captured and enslaved population.
Yeah, you get that, I guess, going into the Sarah section, where like what occurs to Sarah is that in the sort of transition from open genocide to the sort of bureaucratic concentration camps that they've set up, like a much more standardized system, they basically have it, the way it's described is it seems like you can basically effectively like check out a woman from the camp to rape, and then you just have to bring her back. And like what occurs to Sarah is that Fopple becomes infatuated with her, does not bring her back to the main camp, and eventually some of his coworkers, other soldiers, like figure out that he's like got her chained up in his specific house.
Yeah, and sort of a similar gang rape ensues that again calls back to what happened to Fina.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think in a like really perverse way, I'm now thinking your description of this as a kind of checking out from a shared resource, I think is apt, and also calls back to the sort of library of sexual satisfaction that Pig Bodine sets up on the ship back in the previous chapter. Like, I do think there is a kind of analog being drawn to rampant soldiering and sexual satisfaction that is fulfilled in one way or another, that, you know, I think puts into question some of the sexual antics that we see. I mean, they were already questionable, but puts into further question the kind of sexual antics that we see going on at, say, the sailor's grave or elsewhere with the Navy boys in the novel.
Yeah, I feel like we keep getting these sort of like echoes, these like reflections of a different time, and the fossil came back to mind. Like we have like these imprints of a different time that we're carrying around with us. Just wanted to call back to your fossil. It came to my mind.
Mildred Wren is the key to all of this somehow.
I think Mildred's coming back.
Stencil has been looking for V, and he should have been looking for M the whole time.
MW is 4 V's. Wow, mic drop.
Whoa.
Holy shit. MW is 4 V's.
It's 4 V's, and they're inverted like the clocks.
That is some stencil brain right there.
Jesus Christ. Yeah. So, where do we end up here? I wanted to point out. I wanted to point out that I maybe mentioned this earlier. It's been a long episode, but several of these particular scenes of violence are basically word for word quotations from this 1918 report on the genocide that I mentioned earlier. I mean, Pynchon is sort of not ripping them straight from the headlines because they did not make it to the headlines, but ripping straight from the source material. In particular, the image of this, I believe it is Sarah, who is like partly eaten by jackals, and like that image of her corpse is like rendered again word for word in one of these reports, or in this particular report.
I really wish that were not the case.
Yes, I mean it is sort of distressing to a different magnitude, but like the way that I think Pynchon as a writer, he's oftentimes credited as like a fabulist and like a not quite a surrealist, but someone who writes toward a heightened sense of reality. But the ways in which many of the things he writes about are actual literal historical facts is shocking at times.
Yeah, I think that really got me in this chapter. I was really hoping when I Googled the situation that it was going to be like, no, this was just something that Pynchon came up with, but turns out it was a real genocide.
Yeah.
That just wasn't covered in our history classes.
Indeed. Which is something that I think, to our conversation towards the end of the last episode, Paul Thomas Anderson really clicks into in One Battle After Another.
I was reminded of One Battle After Another a lot in this chapter.
I mean, we know for a fact that Paul Thomas Anderson likes V a lot, and I think there are, as I read more of this book, having seen that movie, I know we haven't seen The Master, or we haven't watched The Master together, which is sort of more blatantly riffing on some of these themes. Like, there's a lot of points of connection, I think, especially in their attitudes towards the representation of violence and racialized violence and atrocity, and the frankness with which they're kind of willing to address these things.
I also thought the like portrayal of the perpetrators of this violence felt similar. Of we're seeing these sort of like wealthy characters who have like benefited from this violence over the course of decades or centuries, and like their attitudes and psyche. I felt like there were some resemblances between like Fopple and his friends and the Christmas adventurers.
Oh, in a big way, yeah.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Fopple, presumably, as just like a German infantryman, comes from just a very middle class family background, I would assume. Whatever the 1900s German middle class looks like. But by the time this section is taking place in the 1920s, he's like a full-on estated landowner, right? Like he owns an enormous piece of property and has a huge amount of wealth through this violence. Like it is just, he doesn't seem to be particularly special in this genocide. Like he's just a guy who is there. Presumably there's lots of these people who chose not, like, I guess, maybe someone back to Germany after it was done to go keep doing other stuff, but some of them were just like, I guess I'm just going to stay here and amass wealth off the back of these people who we've just had in concentration camps.
Yeah, and they even talk about, like, he talks about killing the soldiers who come who develop a bit of a conscience. Like, he talks about soldiers who maybe who do feel some shame and are questioning what's being done here. And maybe we just get mixed up and kill them too.
Says they all met accidents.
Yeah. So the people who are left here, I think, are the worst of the worst. I mean, I don't think. Clearly they are the worst of the worst, but I think they've weeded out anyone who had a shred of a conscience.
When this whole thing is about this kind of gradual, as the Nazi extermination program would later sort of pointedly reveal, like all of this is about a kind of like winnowing of humanity and like a weeding out of the what is taken to be the essential or the best of the best, really, as you just said, the worst of the worst. I think the sort of one of the most stunning prose moments of the book for me so far comes at the end, near the end of this section, where Pynchon writes about this other wall, the engineering design for a world he knew with numb leeriness nothing could now keep from becoming a reality. And then continues sort of further down. I won't read the whole extremely long sentence, but it's a world where finally humanity was reduced out of a necessity which in his loonier moments he could almost believe was only Deutsch Südwest Africa. Actually, he knew better. Out of a confrontation the young one's contemporaries, God help them, had yet to make, humanity was reduced to a nervous, disquieted, forever inadequate but indissoluble popular front against deceptively unpolitical and apparently minor enemies that would be with him to the grave, a sun with no shape, a beach alien as the moon's Antarctic, restless concubines in barbed wire, salt mists, alkaline earth, the Benguela current that would never cease bringing sand to raise the harbor floor, the inertia of rock, the frailty of flesh, the structural unreliability of thorns, the unheard whimper of a dying woman, the frightening but necessary cry of the strand wolf in the fog. Just like gave me chills reading it, and I think again reveals this sort of different, sharper, darker facet of Benny Profane's quest against the sun, and this like desire to eliminate the inanimate or to stand against the inanimate, and when other humans are rendered part of that inanimate enemy and inanimacy is sort of like employed against them, all represented in this like haunting hyena cry that has kind of been with us for the entire chapter, basically.
Speaking of hyenas, I think in the last section we skipped over maybe the only item for the Pynchon cookbook in this 2-chapter section, which was the veal that was served to the guests that they like ripped apart with their hands.
Okay, sure, yeah.
Do you remember that?
Where does that come up?
I was like struck by
I don't
that
remember
line.
this.
No one else remembers the veal?
Sorry, please tell us about the veal.
Yeah, okay, wait. Let me find the quote. Yeah, so they this is on page 270 in my edition. It says, in the evening, a roasted veal was set out on a long table in the dining hall. Guests fell upon it drunkenly, tearing away choice pieces of flesh with their hands, staining what clothes they wore with gravy and grease. And I felt like that was a very hyena-esque image of like a bunch of hyenas sort of like tearing into the flesh of this like veal, and also really captured the like violence and decadence of this whole affair.
Yeah, well,
so it's not really an appealing item for the cookbook, but I did circle it since it did come up in this 2-chapter sequence.
Yeah, I guess our job is not to
not to litigate
judge,
what is good food, but to record
not to litigate what
food,
is good food, but to record what Thomas Pynchon shows people eating
and teach you how to cook it yourself.
Yeah, someone else might have to take the lead on the veal one, as I am a vegetarian. But
no, but I think you're right though that I somehow missed this or didn't recall this part of the chapter, but yeah, this makes a very striking similarity to the hyenas who are constantly watching sort of from outside the walls, laughing in, but also you've got this pack of hyenas who are laughing and reveling inside the walls of this estate and
makes you wonder if the hyenas are hyenas or if it's like the people that are the laughing hyenas inside the estate.
Yeah, is the siege keeping other people out or is it keeping these people in? I was also going to say that the veal is a little reminiscent of the fashing party where they're like throwing the roasted cat around until it disintegrates all over the place.
I forgot about the roasted cat. Sort
of an intermediate, or maybe the veal is the intermediate step. Roasted cat. I guess it's roasted. No, we're not putting roasted cat on.
No, we're not going.
We have roasted.
They don't eat
rat.
it. They don't eat the roasted cat.
But that's because they
roasted it for some reason.
Yeah, they roasted
it to eat it.
Yeah, someone was going to eat it.
You got the cat, the veal, and then I
think we might need to make a 2-tiered to cookbook. Items that we actually want to eat and items that are not for consumption, but merely for literary purposes.
There you go.
For completeness.
So at the end of this section, if we flash back to, I guess we flash forward, back, all around. We flash to the fashing, which now that I'm thinking of it, kind of feels like a little bit of a pun on fascist, perhaps, something Pynchon is rolling with. To see the results of this rebellion from which Mondagen fled in the first place, as these small group of, it says here, the Bondels, a sub-tribe, I believe, of the Nama people are moving towards the plantation until over the horizon in the direction of the Union came 2 biplanes flying low and lazy like birds wandered away from a flock. Here once again we get like bird imagery, and the rebellion is pretty quickly demolished and decimated.
As are sort of voyeurs from this like castle, like watch from the rooftop.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's sort of like an entertainment show, not unlike the planetarium facsimile. They're just sort of watching this like scene play out like a play or something.
Yeah, we've talked so much about the horror of what they were talking about or what was written about in the 1900 rebellion, but here we've got several planes bombing like a half dozen people, and then the remaining soldiers like rushing in through the smoke to bayonet and shoot anyone who is not being killed by the bombs.
Yeah, this notion of like the voyeurism toward atrocity comes to a head in where we get another Pynchon neologism in this chapter towards the end. At least he was to experience a for him rare ach phenomenon. It's ACH phenomenon, which J. Cary Grant notes is probably a combination of the phenomenon of going ach in German, as if it's like an epiphany. It's the experience of going ah. So Mondagen has this rare for him ach phenomenon, the discovery that his voyeurism had been determined purely by events seen and not by any deliberate choice or pre-existing set of personal psychic needs. So it's just like a total disavowal of unconscious desire. That like the reason he always finds himself watching things is because things are just always happening in front of him. It's like an offloading of the world out of the self. In a way, it reminds me of the opposite approach to the kind of dental psychotherapy that Eigenvalue professes, where everything is rendered internal in your teeth, in your psyche. Here, it's just things are happening in the world. Obviously, you're bound to watch them happen.
Yeah, and then he sort of finally has enough of this bacchanal. He sort of feels like, he says he remained up in his turret took occasional breaks, began to wonder if he would ever escape a curse that seemed to have been put on him, one Fasching, to become surrounded by decadence no matter what exotic region, north or south, he wandered into. It couldn't be only Munich, he decided at some point, nor even the fact of economic depression. This was a soul depression, which must surely infest Europe as it infested this house. And so we have this sort of coming together of the like Fasching that he experienced in Munich and this experience that he's had and this tie back again to the sort of decadence and depression in this house and as a commentary on the sort of political state of Europe.
And the decky dance that we once, or we will eventually find in North Carolina.
Another fossil.
I mean, like, it feels kind of related that we are explicitly told that, you know, Winsome was born in 1923. This is happening in 1922. Like, there's a global Ach phenomenon, you might say, that is developing. Again, we're back in Hegelian territory of the extent of Europe's willingness to demolish and destroy, sometimes even itself.
Yeah, and I just have such an image of this like party at this house where these people are just like sort of dancing and partying themselves to death. Like several of them have died.
Yeah, they keep dying.
Yeah, it's mentioned that, I mean, Mondragon had scurvy, but yeah, it says that several people have died and many others are sick and ill from being drunk for 2 straight months, I guess.
Yeah, they'll do it. And so we finally get the payoff on the code that Weissman has been working on all along. He runs into the turret, and he's got it. He's figured it out. And it's a string of letters. If you take every third letter, you get a bunch of other letters.
An anagram.
God mean T Nurk.
Which rearrange spells.
Here it is, Duri. You finally get your anagram.
Kurt Mondragon.
And if you take the remaining letters in the original string, what are you left with, Patrick?
You're left with, in my best German, Die Welt ist alles, was der Fall ist.
That was good.
Thank you.
The world is all that the case is.
Which is a sort of very literal transcription of the famous first proposition of Wittgenstein's Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. Would y'all like a quick little Wittgenstein?
Please.
Sure.
John? Sure. What have we got to lose? Really quickly, Wittgenstein, language philosopher, was also, comes from a very upper crust, wealthy family, the Wittgensteins. He gives up all of his family money back in Vienna and joins up in the First World War, eventually becomes sort of like a superstar philosopher for this book, the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, which is basically, starting from this proposition that the world is everything that is the case, discusses how the world, what we can say about the world is facts about the world, that there is a concrete, singular form of like a logical expression. And the whole book is him sort of trying to puzzle out exactly what that is. This is the birth of logical positivism as a philosophical discourse. Him and like Bertrand Russell is also involved in this, and Anscombe and other folks, especially in the European or in the English Academy, sort of separate from all of this Hegelian stuff that is going on the continent. His later work kind of revises some of these assumptions that he makes in his first book, and he begins to think of language not as a kind of perfectible system of positive expressions, but as something that is defined purely by context and in use. So if I'm speaking a sentence to you in a particular context in a conversation, I could go and say that exact same sentence to somebody else, and it would have a different meaning purely because I'm using the language differently. We are playing a different, what Wittgenstein calls language game. But in this initial utterance, it is basically an attempt at figuring out how to concretely say things about the world. And yet it ends in this almost kind of mystical tenor, where Wittgenstein leaves the door open. In one way of framing it, he says that the whole book is a ladder, and then at the very end of the book, he asks you to throw away the ladder that got you up to where you are, so that you can get to like the final reckoning here, which is, in contrast to the world is all that is the case, whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. And so it's an admission that, like, it doesn't make sense to talk about things that we can't talk about because they are, by definition, inexpressible. And so they have to be shown in a particular way outside of language. There has to be a kind of a different, non-logical expression of these non-linguistic, non-logical things. And Wittgenstein was like a very devout Christian man, so a lot of this is tied up in his understanding of God. But this feels very much in parallel with Mondagen's final assertion that, like, things are just happening in front of him. These are what he is witnessing, this debauchery, these atrocities are all just collections of facts and propositions that are bouncing off of each other that construct this thing that his logical sense tells him is a world.
Sounds kind of like what Stencil's building.
It also kind of sounds like what Stencil's building, yeah. Like a logical construction where, in point of fact, there might be none. Stencil might do well to read Wittgenstein's later work in philosophical investigations.
He might be looking into it right now.
I've been dying to talk about this.
I
hope.
can tell.
Can you? I hope we get more Wittgenstein. I guess philosophical investigations was like, it would have just come out in Stencil's universe. Sort of Wittgenstein died shortly before it was published, so in 1953. So maybe it just hasn't gotten around to it.
Sure, I'll get there. Patrick, this scene, this is not I didn't make this connection. I wish I made this connection. This connection was brought to my attention deep on Reddit. But if I describe to you a man in the military bringing a code to a researcher and then showing him that the code has his name inside of it, what would it remind you of?
Oh, this does remind me of something.
From a specific media franchise that you are a big fan of. And me too, but you more so. That takes place in the Pacific Northwest.
Oh, it's Twin Peaks.
Yeah, Major
Briggs.
Yeah, it
says Cooper. Major Briggs brings
Cooper the like White Lodge message.
The White Lodge message from the like research base that just says Cooper, Cooper, Cooper.
Yeah.
Damn. I wish I'd caught that.
A deleted user on Reddit, making great connections out there.
Shout out to that deleted user, wherever you are. That's choice. Companion podcast where we rewatch Twin Peaks alongside our support us on Patreon.
There's a lot of paranoia in Twin Peaks. It would be thematically fitting.
You want to keep talking for another 3 hours? There's connections I'm already drawing. So yes, we can close out this chapter by saying
Mondagen leaves the house.
Mondagen leaves
the house. And he gets picked up by a member of the Nama tribe who has lost his arm in the fighting, and also the rest of his family, I think. But they just ride off sort of into the sunset together on a donkey.
There's a significant amount of like intimacy here where he is like leaning on he leans his cheek against the scarred back of this man, which is a very bleak and also kind of graceful note to end on.
Yeah.
And there's this, I think, connecting back to our animacy themes, they seemed the only that them and the are they on a horse?
No, it's a donkey.
A donkey.
The donkey they're on.
Jesus.
They seemed the only three animate objects on the yellow road which led he knew sooner or later to the Atlantic. The sunlight was immense, the plateau country wide, and Mondagan felt a little and lost in the dun-colored waste. And so I feel like we have like three things that have been coming up. We've got the desert, we've got the sun, we've got the animacy. As we're sort of like zooming out at the end, I felt like this was another like cinematic shot where we're watching these sort of like this silhouette of these two men on a donkey, like kind of riding off into the sunset.
Yeah, like the riders leaving town at the end of the Western.
The camera follows them and then stays in place as they continue moving.
Yeah, and they begin to, the man begins to sing. So there's also a little bit of a outro.
Begins to sing in a language that Mondagan doesn't understand, pointedly, because he's been hearing all the like Dies Irae and the Dawn Chorus and all sorts of other songs, but this one he seems to sort of listen to as music.
Yeah, this felt oddly hopeful, even though it came after such like a really, really horribly dark chapter.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we know where Mondagan ends up, which
feels less than hopeful.
A part of the Nazi war machine.
And then the American war machine.
Funny how history repeats itself, says Thomas Pynchon.
Almost like it's a series of folds with sort of like crests and waves.
Almost like it's a clock that can only go back around to the beginning.
Almost like a mirror that just keeps reflecting itself.
That was oddly poetic as far as endings this episode go. I just wanted y'all to keep going. Do we have any final thought? That was the final thought. I feel like on this. Yeah, we are well past our bedtimes. I think we can bring this to a close. Shout out to you, the listener, for joining us on this extremely long, but worthwhile, I think, journey through history's bleakest moments thus far, anyways. Thank you for listening to us at Pynchon Pals, as always, and thank you to Andrew Tillett.
Thank you both.
And to Duri Long.
Thank you both.
For joining me. If you like what we're doing here, we would love it if you left us a review on Apple Podcasts or in your podcatcher of choice. You hear every podcast say this, but it's really true. Those reviews and the juice that they put into the miraculous algorithm that is the content ecosystem are kind of the number one way you can help us out. The other way you can help us out is just by spreading this show by word of mouth. We would love to find new listeners who are friends, family, and acquaintances, or strangers to other listeners. If you would like to get in touch with the show or submit a question to be answered on air, we would love to answer it, and you can reach us at pynchonpals@gmail.com. Our theme music is Horology by the inimitable King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, released under a Creative Commons Attribution No Derivatives license on the album Polygon Dwanaland. Pynchon Pals is produced and edited by me, Patrick Fiorilli. You can find more of my work alongside my newsletter, Critical Theory Craft, at my website, www.patf.io. Until next time, would you like to hit us with our code phrase, Duri? I thought you were just going to say, see you later, alligator.
But you wanted me to read the code. Diga Voldtim Steel Allen Swatassender Fuolerlixt. Till next time.
See you later, alligators.
I really thought it was going to be easier to do this with a cold than it has been, mostly just because my nose. I feel like the guy in here that they said every orifice of... Oh, it was Mondagan. He said like every orifice of his body was leaking. I felt that way about my nose throughout that entire episode.
Oh, yeah. I haven't stopped recording. That's going to be good to put at the tail end of this episode.
Ew.
I didn't say this at the beginning, but to the beginning of the Profane, where he's sitting out in the park, like being like, I'm gonna go to the middle of the park where it's in between the employment agencies to meet women, just felt so that one season of Seinfeld where George is unemployed. It seemed like just such a Seinfeldian-esque scheme to meet women. Jason Alexander would be an excellent Benny Profane. Dude, just Jason and Julia Louis-Dreyfus. Just get them in there.